Hello and welcome to episode 8, I believe, of the Right Angle podcast. Today we're going to be discussing the blazing question that's been on Twitter recently of what is nationalism? I'm joined today by Project Razmataz. Say hello.
Hello.
You want to plug?
Yeah. I run a show, Wonderland, bi-weekly on Sundays. No, it's Saturdays. I'll get it right one time. That's about it. Just search my name.
Yeah. Joined by Charlie. Hello, Charlie.
Hello.
How's it going?
Fine. I just Raz woke me up 20 minutes ago.
Brilliant. How long were you asleep?
A good 3 hours.
Nice. Very nice. Very nice. Anything you want to plug?
I'm actually going to suggest following my Twitter. Of I'm Megaman. I used to not suggest my Twitter because it was a cesspool, but I've decided I'm going to make it a bit better.
Okay. A bit better.
It's still going to be a cesspool. It's just going to be it's not as bad. It's still a big puddle of shit. Don't get me wrong, but it's gonna not be as deep.
All right, fair enough. Fair enough. So everybody can follow Charlie's Twitter, and we'll see the progress, see how it goes. And finally, last but not least, we are joined by JG Politics. Welcome, John.
Evening.
Anywhere you want to direct
just search me on Instagram, JG_politics.
Okay, brilliant. So, lads, what is nationalism? This is the discussion, the sort of raging debate that's been taking place over the last couple of days. I think it was on Wednesday that it all kind of began with a tweet from Carl Benjamin. I mean, if you're watching this show, then you 100% know who Carl Benjamin is. I don't need to introduce him, but this is where it began, where this person tweeted, you see lots of these pictures going around, right? And this person tweeted this picture of a bunch of brown school kids and said, "Your ancestors fucked around and you are finding out." To which Carl responded, "They keep explaining how they are taking revenge on us." Serena Brown, I don't know who that is, but she said, "Why aren't you a nationalist? You agree with all our talking points." And Carl responded with a very, very controversial statement. Apparently a very controversial statement, that nationalism is the left wing of the French Revolution. To which, at the risk of turning into Keemstar Drama Alert or whatever it's called, Kenny Smith, who is the leader of the chairman of the Homeland Party, responded that is complete nonsense and that Carl needs to do more reading. Brilliant.
Is Steve Laws not in charge of Homeland?
Who, sorry?
Steve Laws?
No, he's just a member. He's just a
right.
member. He's not. He doesn't have any sort of leadership position or anything. No. It's not on here. It's on here. Kenny Smith then put out this rather large tweet saying, I'll just read a bit of it. So this is sort of indirectly, it's directly in response to Carl. That it's ludicrous for someone to style themselves as part of the intelligentsia and philosophically literate, and then claim that nationalism is a French invention rooted in the revolution. It completely ignores the history of these islands and the nationalist imperative that drove the people and nations of our homeland. Nationalism is in our DNA, and no amount of pseudo-intellectual musings will change that. He continues on that he was talking to people about nationalism, and they said the same thing, that it's a French invention. He said, when I questioned them and explained that my Scottish ancestors may have thought his, as in the guy saying it's a French invention, may have fought his ancestors centuries before in the name of nationalism, they're usually lost for words. So you can see here that Kenny Smith's interpretation, and therefore Homeland's interpretation of nationalism, is that it's this sort of eternal sort of spirit that people have towards their own people, this feeling that they have towards their own people. What do you guys think? Is that sort of how you would characterize nationalism yourselves?
No, I think nationalism is very specifically in reference to a nation, less so than like a community.
Okay, so
I'd agree with Raz there, actually.
So what is the nation then? Is it the state?
Yeah,
the
it would
country?
have, at least in a modern concept, it would be, yeah.
So you wouldn't say it's the people themselves are a nation?
Not anymore, but they should be the same. So it should be a case of obviously Scotland for the Scottish, that kind of stuff. They should be the same, but they're not necessarily.
Charlie?
No, it's about the people.
Yeah,
Like,
you say it's about the people.
Yeah.
Me too.
If I put my mic close to my face, you might be able to hear me.
Yeah, good idea.
I think the state ultimately is like irrelevant. Nationalism is a love for your nation and its people, not the state is run by.
See, I put this example to Raz whenever it was, yesterday or the day before. Like, what about, for example, the Kurds? Are they a nation, or are they a people without a nation? And if they somehow manage to make Kurdistan come into existence, that would then be a nation. Is that what you reckon,
that would
Raz?
be
Yeah.
that would be my position, yeah. But I do want to sort of create a distinction. I do say nation, though I think it would be more accurate to say country, less than nation. I think it's got the word nation in the name. It kind of implies nation, but I think when people say it, they refer to the country, not the nation.
Yeah, because the thing is, the word nation, like the etymology of it, I think it's like natus in Latin, or natio. It kind of, like, in that sense, and obviously words can change and stuff, but in that sense, it's about like it has like an ethnic connotation to it. So at least in the original sort of etymology of the word, it is about like ethnicity. So it's rooted in the people rather than any sort of political entity. Like I say, words can change over time and stuff, but
my understanding of nation is that a nation is the country and the government sort of combined into one entity.
Okay, so what about in sort of pre-modern times, like medieval times, where it was all kingdoms?
I think the kingdom would have been a nation, because obviously the king would have been sort of the government in this example, and the nobles and that. So I think the nation would have just been the kingdom. Whereas I would agree that the country is... So I feel like the way Charlie defined the nation is the way I would define country. Because have you ever heard it's from Pipkin Pipper, so I'd imagine you wouldn't, but have you ever heard the quote, "Love your country, hate your government"?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, it's that kind of idea that there is a difference between there's a separation between the country and the government. And I think both of those parties would come together and create nationalism. So nationalism is really the child of the two combined, really. So I think if it comes to sort of the idea of loving your country, then I would agree with Charlie's, or Peter Griffin, sorry, Gita Priffin's description of it. But if it's a case of the nation, then I would probably side more with the nationhood, less so than the people that comprise it.
I think it's difficult for us as like members of a people group that have had their own sort of sovereign state for a very, very long time. I think it's difficult for us to sort of understand it from other people's kind of perspectives, like, say, the Kurds who do not have a nation, right? Or the Italians or the Germans who only acquired their nation very recently in sort of historical terms. I think it's difficult for us to understand it, you know what I mean?
Yeah, I would imagine like foreigners would have different positions on it. Though I'd imagine the Welsh would be kind of similar to them. So I guess Charlie can fill in on that one, sort of how the Welsh view it. As for a long time, they have just been in England.
I feel one with the blades of grass in the field. I go walking through the woods and I hear the spirit of the druids in the trees.
Okay, well, so let's have a look. See, so somebody put a comment here. Well, it's from like ChatGPT, I suppose, from the looks of it. But I thought this was quite illuminating, just to sort of back up, so we can get into like the whole idea of is it like a modern ideology or is it just like an eternal spirit thing? Because I think there is, not to sound like a fence-sitting like pussy or whatever, but both sides are sort of correct, because there obviously is and always has been this kind of inherent loyalty to one's own people, right? And sort of putting your own people above others. There obviously kind of always has been that, but at the same time, the nationalism that we see like in sort of, well, in and around the French Revolution, like the Enlightenment sort of ideology of nationalism, in a sense, is kind of left-wing. Carl's not exactly wrong about that. So I think everybody who's like calling him a retard or whatever was kind of getting a little too emotional about it. But yeah, this comment here says, historical accounts suggest that nationalism, particularly during the French Revolution, was initially a left-wing ideology. This perspective emerged as a response to the Enlightenment values of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The concept of nationalism was closely tied to the idea of popular sovereignty, where the nation was seen as a collective entity formed by the free will of its citizens. And so the reason, and I'll sort of defend Carl here, although I don't entirely agree with him, but just, you know, for the sake of argument, nationalism in the sort of in and around the French Revolution kind of was a left-wing ideology, right? Because where these terms left-wing and right-wing come from, obviously, is the French Revolution, right? Where did you sit in the National Assembly? If you sat on the left side of the king, you were a revolutionary, and if you sat on the right side of the king, you were a conservative. And the nationalists sat on the left, because basically their conception of nationhood was it's in the people rather than being a sort of separate thing based on...
I am the state, King Louis XIV.
Yeah, exactly. So they saw it as being based in the people. And when you see it that way, you kind of have to basically accept so that you can recreate it when the collective will moves in a certain direction. So it's actually a very progressive view to have, because it strips, like Charlie said, you know, I am the state. It strips the idea of nationhood away from this inherently monarchical thing, which it had been for most of history before that.
Yeah, divine right.
And so, yeah, well, and like, yeah, basically all of history before that, really, at least European history. So nationalism in this sense, at least in the French Revolution, was inherently tied up with a sort of liberal democratic republicanism. So I think what Carl is saying when he says that he rejects it for being a left-wing ideology, I mean, I think he could have explained himself much better, but I think so nationalism is the right wing of the French Revolution. I think what he means to say there is, in stripping the idea of nationhood away from the king and putting it in the people, or sort of the collective will of the people, that's an inherently very progressive view of things. But then on the other hand, like to sort of argue against Carl, I've never heard him explicitly say, although now that I'm about to say this, I've just noticed he's got it here. I've never really heard him say, like, I'm a traditionalist, or even really espouse any sort of traditionalist views.
He's always said he's conservative.
No, I contest that. I don't think he has actually said he's a conservative. Because when he was a classical liberal, he used to heavily contest that, and I don't think today he actually accepts the term. Because I think he's also realised that it's a case of the conservatives just want to conserve the paradigm, and if that paradigm's left wing, well, hang on, we've got some issues now.
Yeah, I think he does reject the term conservative, but yeah, it's funny that he's got there that he's a postmodern traditionalist. Sort of a contradiction in terms, but we can get into that another time. But what I was going to say was I've never really heard him espouse any sort of traditionalist talking points in the sense of divine right of kings, that sort of thing. So, So on the one hand, nationalism is left wing in the French Revolution. Yes, technically true. On the other hand, I don't necessarily know if he'd be sitting on the right wing of the National Assembly if he were there. So I think his sort of assertion that he wants to reject all elements of the French Revolution, much like myself, I don't know if he would actually do that. I don't know if he does actually do that, and if he doesn't realize that he's not actually doing that, because I think at heart he's still a liberal.
He talks about how we need to sort of reject the Enlightenment paradigm, but I've never seen him put any sort of ideas out himself. More so, he just criticizes the things that we do today.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting to note that he's not saying, I might be misunderstanding, but he's not saying that nationalism is left wing. He's saying that in the context of the French Revolution, it's left wing. But then the question of, well, what is left wing today gets raised.
Yeah. I mean, nationalism today, I was going to say, is definitely not left wing, but that's actually not true. You can have left wing nationalism. It happens all the time. Look at the Irish. Look at the Welsh. Look at the Scottish, right? These are all left wing nationalists. So, I mean, that's one thing that people often, well, always get wrong about nationalism. Whenever, even, we fall into this all the time. People on our side of things. Whenever you speak about nationalism, you always frame it in terms of being like a right wing thing. Not necessarily true. In many cases, it's left wing.
I think that's because the left are a lot more like globalist now. Obviously, the war between the sort of national socialists and the international socialists didn't really end well for the nationalists, did it?
Well, it's more so the liberals came in and destroyed the nationalist side of the socialist movement.
Yeah. So, okay, let's continue with this then. So, this is Carl in response to Kenny Smith's tweet. Hi, Kenny. There's no need to be rude to me. I just don't want to adopt an ideology which begins in liberalism. So, yeah, like I said, he's sort of, I mean, basically the same thing as any sort of self-respecting traditionalist, right? You reject all elements of the French Revolution. Don't want anything to do with it. So he wants to reject nationalism on the basis that it's rooted in liberalism, which, as I've said, is sort of technically true. So continuing, philosophically, the way it constructs the world is at odds with the way I believe it to be. There comes a time when the good of nationalism as an ideology conflicts with the good of the nation itself, and the nationalist sides with his propositional moral beliefs rather than the concrete good of the nation itself. I don't know if that's necessarily true. The idea that you would put the ideology of nationalism above the good of the nation itself. I mean, that could be true, but he
But is that
kind of
not
makes it sound
contradictory?
inevitable. Yeah.
Nationalism is just putting your, well, it depends on how we're talking about nationalism, because he's rejecting
Yes.
it, but like the modern definition of nationalism has nothing to do with the French Revolution. So it seems to be like he's just seen the French say the word and said, well, I can't be associated with that anymore, without understanding that they're just completely different concepts.
I like the
Yeah, I
idea
mean-
that we have something come out the mouth of a Frenchman and we immediately reject it on the basis it's French.
Yeah. Yeah, but that's the thing. It kind of, there are two nationalisms, and I think the entire issue here is getting those two nationalisms mixed up. And I think, I really like Carl, but I do think he's wrong here. I mean, he's correct that in a sense nationalism is rooted in the French Revolution, at least the modern sort of nationalism, the way we see it today. But then having said that, this kind of French revolutionary nationalism isn't all that relevant, really. Like, it's when we speak about nationalism, Raz, if I talk to you and I say something about nationalism, blah, 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 like, you know what I mean, and I know that you know what I mean, and we both know that it doesn't really have anything to do with the French Revolution.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that a monarchist could be a nationalist just completely disproves the entire definition that he's using. And especially in England, since we are a monarchy, it feels like we are using European definitions for English politics.
Yes.
That just doesn't really seem applicable.
Yes.
I would actually argue he is a nationalist, even if he doesn't like the term, because he does want to put Britain first, really. So he would be a nationalist by the definition.
Yes, by the sort of colloquial definition.
Yeah.
Like the way that we just use it in common conversation, sure. But yeah, I'll continue. He continues, when the moral beliefs of ideology are critiqued, people become hostile and defensive, showing that already the belief is more important than the reality. Why should I not expect this to scale upwards? No, nationalism is not ancient. It was a creation of the French revolutionaries in the beginning of the 19th century. I think I hope that's a typo.
The 19th century.
Because if it isn't, then that's not good. It was a creation of the French revolutionaries in the beginning of the 18th century. But even then, the beginning of the 18th century, no, it wasn't. I mean, he means at the end of the 18th century is what he should say. But yeah, as all ideology is, and there's a reason that liberal revolutionaries adopted it and began the first levée en masse from it. It turns people into numbers. So the levée en masse, I'll just get it up quickly, was basically the first time, at least the first time that I know of, and at least in European politics, Charlie will probably say that I'm wrong, that you sort of no longer had sort of aristocratic armies. You started to levy people en masse, just like the common people, and create an actual national army. Previously, sorry. Cool.
This was definitely more so the thing that happened. Armies of the day still would have been commanded and led by the aristocratic class, who still would have joined things like the cavalry units and things like that. Sort of the units of honor. but the main bulk of the army is just going to be like mass levied men, just given a musket.
Yeah. Because previously war had been the sort of reserve of the aristocrats, because it would have been fought by the people who had enough money to be able to buy their own armor and weapons and horses. Right, so the sort of the common folk wouldn't have been fighting in wars, not really. But this changed kind of with the French Revolution, basically. So yeah, as it says here, 1793, all able-bodied unmarried men between the ages of 18 and 25 were required to enlist. So you can see here that a sort of national army is being created, where you would have had armies before that would have been made up of aristocrats. They would have been fighting on behalf of France, but it wouldn't necessarily have been a national army, if you see what I mean.
Medieval armies still had levies. It's the extent of this which is the main change. I mean, the only way Napoleon was able to bring an army of 500,000 men into Russia is because of this.
Yeah,
like a medieval nation just wouldn't have had the capacity to do this.
Yeah, and this was actually a good few years before Napoleon as well. This 1793. When did Napoleon enter the picture? What, 99?
I can't remember off the top of my head.
Or even
but
later
it
than that,
it is this law that would have allowed the creation of Napoleon's Grand Army.
Yeah, and even before this, I'm just going to have to look it up for the exact year. But they had the levy of 300,000. Oh, yeah. Sorry. Yeah, the levy of 300,000, and then later on they went with the levy en masse, which is every able-bodied unmarried man between 18 and 25. So what happens here? I think this is a really underrated, massive change in the course of history, because this, as you say, Charlie, leads to Napoleon being able to do all the crazy shit that he was able to do, but it also leads to the First World War, right? The Second World War. It was in this moment, and sort of developed later in Napoleon, who once bragged that he could throw away 30,000 lives a month. It was here that total war was invented. You didn't have total war before this, or at least not on this scale, right? Where you're talking like massive European nation states.
I mean, the idea of death warring came into existence here.
Yes, because previously, especially, I mean, we're talking purely in like European terms here. Previously, you would have had wars where you were essentially just like fighting over a bit of land with your like aristocratic army. The general would have been... They weren't even really trying to kill each other a lot of the time as well. It was all about outmaneuvering the opposing enemy. So in a sense, it was like a game of chess. And you would have...
Well, you lose your aristocratic class. There's a lot on the line.
Yeah, so you didn't want to kill or be killed. You just wanted to sort of win by outmaneuvering them and pushing them off of the field, right? And so you would have situations where the general of one army would be sending a letter to the general of the opposing army saying like, oh, that was a really good tactic, mate. Like, nice one, you know? Because it was a game. It wasn't sort of actual like life or death, like an existential proper threat like what ended up coming out of this. And so, like I say, I really think this is a very pivotal thing, because you have, firstly, the invention or the sort of development of total war. But as a byproduct of that, as a consequence of that, you end up with far louder and far more legitimate calls for representation in government, because when you're being called up to fight and potentially die for the nation, you start to expect that the government of that nation will represent your interests.
And I mean, like the scale of death as well. Like again, Napoleon saying like I can lose 30,000 men a month and continue advancing. Like, what are your odds of survival at this point?
Yeah, it's crazy. I mean, some of the most famous battles in history didn't contain 30,000 men, like, at all.
No, what the Battle of Agincourt was what? It was like 20,000 Frenchmen versus about 6,000 Englishmen.
Yeah, something like that. I mean, it was less than 30,000 men, like whatever the sort of ratio is. Yeah. And now, obviously, that was 300-ish years before, almost 400 years prior. So it's kind of a different thing, right? That's a long time, and a lot changes in that time. But
trying to think of a war probably closer to the time,
closer to like Napoleon's wars. You can think of like the 30 Years' War, 7 Years' War.
I don't know, man. Like the 7 Years' War, like I could probably agree there probably wasn't an engagement that was like 30,000 men strong on like either side, but like the overall like broader scale of that war is like astronomical. But that was actually like a global conflict.
Yeah. Well, and that's another thing, right? That's another thing. So going back to this idea of total war, it's not only that the stakes and your army sizes are growing much larger. It's that the entire apparatus of the state has to be turned towards fighting the war and supplying the war effort. So all of the labor of the people in the nation has to go towards growing food, producing weapons and clothing, ammunition, right? So this is not like in previous eras where your country could technically be involved in a massive war, but it doesn't really affect you. This, once you reach the kind of levels that we're talking about here, it affects the entire nation. So that's just one thing that I think. I mean, everybody should look at the French Revolution because I go on about it all the time, but it changed everything.
Can I very quickly just go back to what you said about a war which was going on in the previous, probably just before the Napoleonic Wars? The only thing that I could think of within the 20 years or so before that, maybe 50 years before that, was probably something like the American War of Independence. And I've just looked at the Battle of Brooklyn, which I know was the biggest battle in that. And just to get the statistics up again, the strength of the British was 200,000, and the strength of the Americans was 20,000 versus the strength of the Americans being 10,000. So when Napoleon was saying, "Oh, well, I can afford to lose 30,000 a month or whatever you said," that was literally the size of an entire battle, not just like the casualties on one side, which I think just proves the point even further. I mean, I understand that a war of independence is it's different, but like you said before this, we didn't really have too many things like this. Because this created, not just in Europe but around the world, this idea of you will fight, you will enlist, and you will fight for your nation, no matter who you are, no matter what your national, I don't know whatever your class is in your nation, or whatever classes would have been called, and in the wider framework of
like revolutionary French politics,
and societies just around the world. This really change everything, and that's, I suppose, one of the biggest influences that Napoleon and I suppose the French Revolution as a whole had around the world, not just in Europe.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely, and that's another thing as well. I think a lot, at least in sort of previous times, right? I think a large part of the sort of national identity that people had, if they had it at all, bear in mind, was sort of forged in opposition to others. Because it's kind of hard for us to sort of think, like, to put ourselves in that mindset now. But back in the day, people had a lot more allegiance to their sort of local area or to their religion than to their nation as such. A lot of people in France, sort of pre-1789, wouldn't really have thought of themselves as French. They would have known, like, yes, you know, I'm French in the sense that I'm, you know, my ancestors are who my ancestors are. And the language that I speak is a dialect of French. But they wouldn't really have identified as French as such. They would have identified a lot more with the sort of particular area that they lived in. Because you have to remember,
So
you know,
they'd be like Parisians instead, is that what you're saying?
I mean, Parisians probably would have been a bit more like cosmopolitan, you know. They probably would have gone along with,
Yeah,
like,
okay.
yeah, we're French, you know what I mean? But people like living out in the sticks who've never gone further than, like, well, they've never left like a 10-mile radius of their village, a 20-mile radius of their village, right? They don't have. There was this really wonderful quote. I wish I could remember who it was that I heard from around this time, which was that each village was a world unto itself, because a lot of these sort of isolated communities just didn't really have much communication with any other part of the country. They were really self-sufficient, and so when you have these massive sort of total wars that we were just discussing, I think that plays a big part in the formation of national identity, in the sort of unification of the people under this label that previously they may not have identified all that much with. You see what I mean?
That's got to be a bit of a shock to the system as well, doesn't it? Like, imagine you're like some Frenchman living in like Aquitaine, right, in some small village, and suddenly the government shows up and says you need to hand over all of your young men. It's like, what?
Yeah. You need to go fight the Austrians. It's like, what? Why? I don't want to. What? It's nothing to do with me, you know. Yeah.
To be fair, the
Totally
French
shocks the
made-
system. Go on, Raz.
The French made lots of efforts to try and like destroy the like regional ethnic identities.
They did. Yeah.
So it could very well just be a case of like the French just destroyed anything that wasn't, you know, French, really. Which is why France is the French ethnic identity is so prevalent in France.
What was it called? Like the Albigensian Crusade, where just like the French just marched down and just like genocided the Octanian people.
Yeah. So I mean, I guess if they've been genocided, then it would make sense as to why, like, they look a lot more unified because everyone that was different is dead.
Yeah, there was one thing that took place during the revolution, which was the French government. Let me get it up on Google Maps. The French government had a big problem with this area called the Vendée region, because they really just didn't want to be involved in all this revolution business at all. Let me get it up. That's the Vendée. Yes. I don't know. You can see here that this is Vendée. and Paris is obviously like really far away from it. And they just wanted absolutely nothing to do with this like revolution bullshit and the centralization of power. This area was like extremely religious as well, for example, so they didn't like the attacks on the Catholic Church. And basically the revolutionary government just ended up absolutely just like laying this area to waste.
And this was during the revolution.
Tens of thousands massacred during the revolution. Tens of thousands of people massacred because they just didn't want they didn't want to go along with this centralization. They wanted their faith. They wanted the king, and they wanted to have like their own local autonomy. So they were just like absolutely staunchly opposed to this, and sort of rose up to fight against it and to defend themselves against it. And in the service of liberty, equality, and fraternity, I've just looked it up. They estimate between 100,000 and 300,000 Vendéans, or whatever they be called, were slaughtered. It even says here, some historians choose to label it a genocide. Yeah, I don't actually remember how we got on this topic, but yeah, I mean, you should look up the Vendée Rebellion. It's it's fucked up, man. But this, I mean,
I'm pretty sure
the entire French Revolution was fucked up. So
I'm pretty sure due to the resistance to the revolution as well, I'm pretty sure the British used it as like a base as well. Like we sent troops and ships there.
Maybe, I'm not sure about that. Not sure as in like, oh, I don't think that's true. Not sure as in I'm not sure. I don't know. But yeah. The reason we got onto that was because like shock to the system, right? Because yeah, again, I think for us living in the 21st century, we sort of forget, or we find it hard to imagine just how much sort of local autonomy you used to have in 1790, right? This was not, especially sort of a country as big as France, it wasn't terribly centralized, really. Even with like Louis, I am the state 14th, it wasn't as centralized as you would think.
Ultimately, this is a Paris issue.
It was, absolutely. Most of the sort of more rural areas were really against it. They just kind of couldn't organize to do anything about it. It was a Paris issue because, I mean, the French Revolution ultimately was a bourgeois revolution, as all revolutions are. This was not a revolution of the common people. This was a revolution of sort of the middle classes, basically, as all revolutions are. And yeah, the sort of disorganized masses were unable to stop it from happening, unfortunately. But yes, we can get back to the beef, and we'll just because we're almost finished with the beef. But I'll just continue what Carl was saying. You seem to be confusing a particular denoted ideological position for acting in the national interest. These aren't the same thing, and often can conflict. Yeah, and they often can conflict. So I guess the main thrust of what Carl is saying there. Go on, sorry. Go on,
when would they conflict? Sorry.
When? Well, I don't know. You'd have to ask him. But yeah, I mean, as a principle, I guess it's true. I just don't see what this particular argument has to do with a rejection of nationalism because it's left wing. This seems to be an entirely different argument. So he's saying he cares more about the national interest than he does about nationalism, which in a certain sense I get, but he's also just not explaining it well. Because again, I don't necessarily think he's coming at this from the sort of traditionalist position of, I don't know, divine right of kings, rejection of the idea that sovereignty is rooted in the collective will of the people, which I think he kind of would believe. Like, he definitely has populist leanings, so I don't know why he wouldn't believe that. So I think, just sort of my verdict to sum up this part, I think this original tweet, he didn't really think about it before he sent it. And I don't mean that as an insult. I mean, I think he just sort of sent out without really thinking about it, not expecting people to kick up a fuss about it, and then him be forced to try to explain himself.
I don't know, man. I feel like if I was going to post something that controversial, I'd probably like clock on. Well, hang on, let's like think this through first.
Yeah, maybe.
Though,
But
there is the question of, because I've seen Tick make a similar argument that nationalism is left wing. He doesn't speak of it from a sort of a French Revolution consequence. He says that because it is collectivist, it is the collective of the nation, that it is then left wing. And
yeah, but he's a mental libertarian. I enjoy his history stuff, but his political views are atrocious, I must say.
Well, now I find myself unable to oppose that. That to me makes sense. And I can't quite disprove that. So how would you sort of argue against it? We'll see.
Well, I would say that collectivism isn't inherently left-wing. You can have right-wing collectivisms, you know. See, because he is, and sort of, I mean, I guess you are as well, like staunch, like free market guys, like libertarians, right? And so you look at the binary in terms of collectivist versus individualist. Collectivism is left wing, individualism is right wing. And I mean, I think that's your basic sort of opinion, right? Like massively simplified, but
yeah, I guess so.
Whereas I would say that sort of myopic, I shouldn't say myopic, that's a bit insulting. That sort of like massive focus on individualism is not really right wing. I think
so.
Right, like
how would you define
a properly like right wing approach to the issue of collectivism and individualism would actually lean more on the collectivist element of it. And I don't mean collectivist in the sense, in the sort of very strong sense of like Stalinist Russia, right, or mid-century Germany, but in the sense that while we are responsible for our own actions, and personal responsibility is a very important thing, we are rooted in a time and in a place and in a social context where we cannot act in such a solipsistic manner. We have to think about the people around us, take care of the people around us. We are not just individuals, right? There's a really good David Starkey quote, right, where Jean-Jacques Rousseau, who was a big part of, obviously, inspiration for the French Revolution, he had this quote where he said, "Man is born free, but everywhere he is in chains." And David Starkey's response is, no, man isn't born free. He's born pissing and shitting and like totally helpless. And it's only through the sort of careful care of his family that he's even able to survive at all. And so from the very, very beginning, and I totally agree with this, from the very, very beginning of our lives, we are embedded within a social context. And so this sort of like hyper-individualism, which sort of libertarian types view as being really right-wing, I think forgets about wider society and the sort of social context in general, and the social relations that make our lives meaningful, in trying to get away from that, that to me actually feels quite left-wing.
So, how would you sort of define left and right? Obviously, being very difficult words to define.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm going to do a Carl Benjamin here and say that I reject it because it's based on the French Revolution. And I'm only half joking when I say that. No. I do reject nationalist right. I think it's a very simplistic way of looking at things. Obviously, it's a useful binary because we kind of know what we mean when we talk about left-wing people and right-wing people. You know basically what I mean when I say it, right? And I know that you will understand what I mean when I say it. But I guess if I had to boil it down, I would say that left-wingers are progressive and right-wingers are not. I guess that's the simplest way that I could say it. I don't mean progressive as in like, oh, they, them pronouns. I mean progressive in your sort of outlook on history. Is the course of history just sort of incremental improvement, and well, yeah, or is it not? That might not be the most sort of popular view. I don't know, but that's what I would say.
I mean, you're trying to define left and right here. Like, you're never going to get a good answer, are you? But to sort of, I think to sort of go back to the idea of like nationalism, the way I think the way you could argue that it has always existed is that it's always like, because what is closer to you, you prioritize more. Obviously, you prioritize your own safety, your family safety, your sort of town safety, and then your country's safety.
Well, it's like sorry to interject, but it's like in the Spirit of Conservatism Part 2, which you can read on Substack, where I lay out my sort of framework of looking at things in this sort of like view of the sort of concentric circles, right? Like circles growing outwards. You have the individual, family, community, and nation, and you sort of have to take care of things in this order. I guess it's a sort of better way of the sort of Jordan Peterson, like, clean up your room sort of philosophy, you know. But sorry, Masco. You have to slay the dragon.
It's just sort of a product of like biology, like evolution, though, because obviously, you know, you evolved to survive. So it would come to reason that nationalism would simply be in human nature. It would just be the desire to protect the tribe. So I think you could definitely argue that as humans, you are like, nationalism is sort of entwined into how you're designed. So I think to say that it comes from the French Revolution, especially the definition we tend to use nowadays, I think is to look past like a lot of human history. And I believe the guy mentioned it when he said, you know, my Scottish ancestors were fighting your ancestors.
Yeah.
And I think if that's like how you're defining nationalism, which I feel like most people would, then I think it's kind of like a non-starter that like it would be inherent to humanity and therefore not a product of the French Revolution.
I think in-group preference is definitely inherent. I don't know if nationalism is, because again, throughout most of human history, people would not have thought in terms of the nation. You see what I'm saying? Like, at the time that Athelstan united the Seven Kingdoms into one, I don't believe most of the English people would have really thought of themselves as English at that time. For example,
I think, sure, but I think that might entirely be a product of the fact that they just don't really know much about like the country. Obviously, being
But,
in the Dark
yeah.
Ages, like
It's not so much about their knowledge though. It's about their identity. Like, what do they feel that allegiance to? I mean, I'm
Yeah, but
sure in a sense they, I'm loyal to the king, and growing from that, I am loyal to the nation, England. But ultimately, I care more about, Northumberland than I do about England, right? Just for example.
sure, but I think even then, like when it comes to a question of nations, you would still choose your own nation over others, even if you do have more
Yes.
loyalty to your region.
Mm.
And I think it's in that is the question of sort of nationalism. Because I imagine we all do the exact same thing. I mean, I care more about Northumbria than I do, down south. Charlie, I'd imagine, would care more about Surrey than he does Manchester. But I think we all like fit the definition of nationalist. Well, I believe John contests that. But I don't think.
Yeah. I mean, what you've been saying about whether they'd feel allegiance to their king and then to their country. In a weird way, I'm not sure they'd have even known what the country actually was. They've known some idea of a way of life, which was theirs, but what would they have truly felt any sort of allegiance to? They'd have probably felt some allegiance to the farm that they worked on, because they might have felt some sort of a allegiance to their. I mean, I'm simply talking about peasants here. Or serfs,
which is the
or whatever
vast
you used to
majority
call
of the population, right? So yeah.
Yeah. So maybe they've probably felt some allegiance to their master of the land that they were working on.
Mm-hmm.
I suppose that they'd have then felt their allegiance to their god of the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then probably through that god, maybe some sort of allegiance back to the king in some way to, I don't know, kind of like make it feel like everything was interconnected in some way, shape, or form.
Well, the king, sort of prior to the Enlightenment, was God's representative on earth.
Yeah, so it kind of links back to everything else, doesn't it? I suppose, but I'm not sure that people would have truly known what the king was.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you brought up
the king was God.
Well, the king was God's representative on earth. They never would have thought that he was God, but he was put there by God, and his position was sort of chosen. Like, he was chosen for that position by God directly. So
yeah.
So people had a massive amount of loyalty to the king based on that, because they were so religious back then. Again, this is another thing that I don't think we can really wrap our heads around today. It's just how religious people were before the Enlightenment. I'm glad that you brought up the sort of the feudal aspect of it. I can't believe I didn't bring that up when I was going on my sort of monologues. But yeah, like your loyalty would have been to your sort of community, your village or whatever. Yeah, your feudal lord, you would have had a lot of loyalty to him as long as he treated you nicely, because he looks after you. Right? You had this sort of the back and forth of responsibilities and these bonds of sort of interdependence. And just back onto the sort of Anglo-Saxons and stuff that Raz was talking about. Remember, I said I'm going to have to look up this quote because it's great, about how each French village was a world unto itself. The person whoever it was who said that was talking about France in like 1770s. Now, if you think about English peasants in like 1100, just imagine how much more strong that's going to be, right? That each village is a world unto itself. Like, you have such, until sort of until sort of 1450, even like 1600, really. If you're just a peasant, you really wouldn't travel very far unless you were to go on a pilgrimage somewhere. But your entire life, again, unless you go on some sort of pilgrimage or whatever, you would live and die in your village. Which is something that we just kind of don't understand today when it's so easy to just fly to Spain, right? Or fly to the US or whatever.
It sounds slightly strange, but the only way that I can truly wrap my head around it, and it's going to sound stupid, but it does kind of make sense, is the Shire in The Lord of the Rings.
Absolutely, yeah.
Like, and you've got that where you don't go outside of your cornfield, and you've got that en masse, probably millions of times around the nation, especially the size of France.
Hmm.
I mean, I'm guessing that medieval France was roughly the same size. I'm not a 12th century historical geek. I'm not gonna lie, but
Charlie can back me up on this. That France's borders are very natural in terms of where they go up to. It's all surrounded by like rivers and mountains. So yeah, they basically always been the same size. Yeah.
So where does your let's say Eleanor of Aquitaine and all of that come into it? Would the borders have changed roughly then, or Brittany, or anything like that, or was it kind of like just it was more or less the same?
Charlie will know more about this than me. Obviously, England did take parts during the sort of like Angevin era. Charlie, are you there?
Yeah, 100 years war.
Yeah, I'm here. Sorry, my mum came in.
No, that's okay. Because obviously England had control of Calais for quite a while, didn't it? 200 years or something, unless I'm completely wrong.
Oh, it was a really long time, Calais.
Yeah, Brittany.
I can't remember when we got it, but I believe we lost it around about the Elizabethan times.
Yeah, so I had it for bloody ages then. Yeah. But you know, like in the sort of grand scheme of things, basically France's borders have been basically secure, right?
That's
the only realistic weak point is Belgium.
Yeah.
Because that is just open.
Yeah.
So I suppose kind of like going back to the original point, it was something like the Shire, millions of times across the nation. You don't talk to people probably even in the next village. Never mind, never mind at the other side of the nation, where you apparently are part of the same nation, apparently have some sort of a connection that would probably not really have felt like it. I suppose that maybe on the borders. So let's say the border of the border of, let's say, with Spain. Maybe you'd have felt a bit of a deeper connection then, because you were like, you were the outpost. We are the end. We are the end of our kingdom. So maybe you'd have almost a deeper connection then. But if you're just somewhere in the middle, like say where modern day Bordeaux is, for example, I mean, obviously it's on the coast, but still, like, you're probably not going to feel as much of a connection as someone who is on like the border of the kingdom. It's like, we are the border, and this is the end of our kingdom. So I think that would inherently mean that you feel somewhat more, well, I suppose what we call today is a nationalistic sense, I suppose.
You probably would have had a greater run-in with foreign merchants.
Yeah, depending on where you lived, you would have come into contact with some foreign merchants. That's true. And like pilgrims, people, going on pilgrimages and stuff. I mean, that was why things like inns, for example, were invented, right? Was to sort of to be able to care for and make a bit of money off of pilgrims traveling through your town or whatever,
I was doing some reading on the papacy in the medieval times. Bro, Rome was a tourist trap.
Yeah, always has been. Something. Wait, Rome is a tourist trap? Always has been. Yeah. Okay, we'll just do one more tweet and then we can get away from the tweets. I mean, we have mixed opinions on this guy, but I think this is it's kind of a fair tweet, I guess. Sort of don't 100% agree with it, but we can look at it anyway. Zoom Historian. Zoom Historian says, England is perhaps the most nationalist nation in history. We've been a unified state for over 1,000 years. One which has always been especially prejudiced against foreigners. He's not wrong. We aren't and this is where he's like directly countering Carl's point about nationalism in the sense as it developed from the French Revolution, which is sort of self-determination for the people based on their collective will. He says, we aren't some Eastern European nation seeking independence from Austria-Hungary. That is a pretty good point, right? We are talking about two different types of nationalism here, the nationalism of a very old country like England versus some Eastern European nation seeking independence from Austria-Hungary, right? Or even like Italy, or even Germany. He continues, nationalism was never new to England. Alfred the Great repelling the Vikings was nationalism. Harold attempting to do the same with the Normans was nationalism. I don't agree with that. I wouldn't call either of those things nationalism, to be honest.
That's just
that's defending your empire. Yeah, that's defending your kingdom. That's not nationalism. No.
Would defending your nation not class as nationalism, though?
Well, it wasn't a nation; it was a kingdom. This is the crux of the issue. Really, is when it stops being how to say it. But when it stops being based on the king and his subjects and becomes the state and its citizens.
Yeah, but these are really like the same things, though, really. I mean, a citizen is just a subject of the state, and the state is just well, I mean, it could be a monarchy or it could be a republic. Like, they're really not that different.
Yeah, I guess what Carl means when he says about nationalism in the French Revolution context is kind of, as I said earlier, there's something about this sort of nationalism which kind of is inherently liberal, democratic, and republican. When nationalism is an ideology rather than just like a sort of spirit that you have, it's kind of inherently liberal, democratic, and republican.
But what if the best thing for your country was to be none of them? To be a non-liberal sort of absolute monarchy? Then would it not be the case that the nationalist thing to do would be to do that? To get rid of liberalism and to establish a monarchy?
I suppose that kind of has been tried, right? Like mid-century Germans. Oh no, that wasn't a monarchy. But actually, just while we're very quickly on this topic, right? What was the plan for when the bad man died? That's something I've just never really thought of.
From whose plan?
The Austrian painter, the moustache man.
What was the
I
plan?
don't think he planned to die, to be honest.
No, but like he had to die at some point.
What was the plan of
Oh,
what?
right, you mean like I don't think there was one. I think it was just evolved into infighting.
So,
I think the
if-
original plan was Rudolf Hess, but he just kind of like killed himself. So
But he
I-
presumably
so,
wasn't much younger than the Moustache Man anyway, was he? So
Probably not.
So
I would imagine
talking
after
about
Hitler, it would
if
have
Hitler
to
had
go
won
to
here.
either
yeah, just
Goering
like
or Himmler.
so
I
yeah,
would
just
imagine.
John, like if the Moustache Man had just like died like a natural death, what was the plan for like succession? You know, I don't know. We're getting sidetracked, but do you have an answer?
After the war had ended, if he'd have died,
If you just
his
died like a
second in
natural
com-
death at some point, you know?
yeah, but I'm specifically saying, was this during or after the war? Because that changes things.
Well,
Because
we'll say after. Yeah.
okay, so after, it was Himmler, Hess, and Goebbels.
Right.
It was going to one of them. I don't think it was specified which it would be.
That's
And then
dangerous.
if we're going to say a little bit later on, well, surely the ideal was that following the end of the war that it would have been it would have been agreed, and then after them it would have been one of the Aryan Guard that were then going to take over, and then it was going to be like that from henceforth. That's my understanding of it, at least.
All right, fair enough. Yeah, just something I never really thought about, I suppose. Okay, let's watch then. How much do you guys know about Homeland?
I know they're based on Twitter.
They are pretty based on Twitter, yeah.
I think I read their Twitter manifesto. Other than that, I don't really know an awful lot about them.
I just know that Bob's, but I'm not going to say very much.
I just know that they want to return to a citizenship system based on jus soli rather than jus sanguinis rather than jus soli, and that's fucking based. So I'm all for it. So we'll just watch this. It's a little under 8 minutes. I'll even do it on 1.25 to speed it up a bit. This is how they look at nationalism. So I've tried to sort of explain the case for it being a left-wing French revolutionary thing, right? But this is their explanation.
Nationalism is a worldview that upholds the belief that the legitimacy of a state is derived from the ethnic, ancestral, and cultural unity of those that it governs.
This sense of organic unity is crucial as it gives rise to trust, harmony, and a shared identity, which are necessary for the smooth functioning of a society. A society can maintain.
Just tell me to pause it if you kind of have anything you want to interject.
A cohesive and a stable state with this shared identity. Defining and protecting national borders and identity is driven by the deep-seated natural desire for political sovereignty and self-determination, which will always be there for people who share a common heritage, traditions, and a homeland.
What leads us to nationalism is not disdain or contempt for other people's. It is a profound love of our own, pride in our ancestors' accomplishments, and admiration for their struggle and sacrifice.
I think that's a good point. I think one thing that people on our side of things should try to do more often is to make clear that, like, although we do want to get rid of the foreigners and stuff, it's not about hating them. It's about loving our own people and wanting what's best for them, and seeing that mass immigration is an obstacle to what's best for our people. We should kind of make clear that this is based in love rather than hatred, right?
I think it depends on the immigrant we're talking about at the time.
Well, we're not talking about like individual immigrants or whatever, right? But just like sort of in the grand scheme of things, yeah.
If we're talking about if we're talking about the modern time, then you also need to remember that the definition of nationalism over time has changed as the political landscape itself has changed. So in the 1940s, there was almost a big push away from, well, the 1950s, maybe moving away from the 1940s and World War II. There was inherently a bit of a push away from using the word nationalism, and that's when we start using the word patriotism in the sense of where we used to use nationalism. Nationalism's definition basically changed into what, you know, the love of one's country at the detriment of another. That's kind of what it turned into, and I'll die on the hill of that's not what nationalism is. Nationalism doesn't inherently say, oh well, you know, I love the fact that I'm British, but to hell with everyone else. Because the entire point of nationalism is, well, I don't really care what's going on in Uganda, to be honest. You know, I don't want them to fail inherently. I just want them to, you know, as long as it doesn't really affect us, I don't really think that that's our issue. And I believe that's kind of like the difference which has been made over the last, I don't know, 80 years or so.
Yeah, that sort of, post World War II. Yeah.
A heartfelt devotion to the land that has kept us well for countless generations. We honour the hard work and toil of the past, which paved the way for opportunities we are privileged with today. As nationalists, we remember that we stand on the shoulders of our ancestors, and we have a duty to pass their legacy on to our descendants.
There are several principles that underpin the idea of nationalism. These are as follows. Self-determination is the principle that each nation is entitled to govern themselves in their respective territories. The right to self-determination has a centuries-old history in mainstream Western philosophy, and a well-established international precedent.
Membership of a nation is defined by ancestry, rather than political or bureaucratic decisions. This is a long-established legal concept called jus sanguinis, or the law of blood. Essentially, a nation is an ethnic group that has become conscious of its unity and seeks to have its own government within a specific...
You see there, Raz, they said that... wait, let me just... Sorry, I want to get the words exactly right. A nation is an ethnic group... A nation
is an ethnic group that has become conscious of its unity and seeks to have its own government.
Conscious of its own unity and seeks to have its own government.
They've conceded to Carl's point there, and they have actually bought into the French definition there.
Yeah. They kind of have, right?
Yeah,
but,
they have.
But then at the same time, but at the same time, I don't know about that necessarily. I don't know about that necessarily. I think it's looking at it from a more sort of metaphysical perspective rather than like a political one. Like we are unified regardless of whether we have a government that works in our name or not, right? We are a people, you know?
Yeah. No, I do think that is that they have conceded to the French, and I don't think that's a very English thing either. Because I mean, with the formation of England, it did just sort of happen. Like realistically,
it was organic.
Yeah, like he didn't like conquer the Vikings in hopes of unifying England. The Vikings were invading him, and he defeated them back. So, the formation of England isn't even like that's not even the definition. The explanation they just gave isn't even the formation of England. It's the formation of Hungary. It's the formation of Bosnia. These Eastern European countries that wanted independence from larger nations.
Yeah,
and I think we can kind of differentiate the idea of like natural nationalism, I guess, and sort of independence-seeking nationalism. And I think they have kind of just like conceded to Carl there, which is a shame because I don't think they really had to. There was no need for that.
Fair enough. I think in a sense this kind of is the more natural way of looking at it, though, to say that the nation is the people and to have that be like separate from the state. But anyway, we'll continue.
Within a specific geographic territory.
A nation's state derives political legitimacy from the ethnic unity.
Yeah, sorry to pause against this soon, but yeah, the nation state derives its legitimacy from the people.
Unity of those it governs, its protective function.
And its ability to protect their interests, right? Yeah, and I think that's a good point, though. The differentiation between the nation and the nation state, because I think you, in particular, Raz, would use nation as basically synonymous with the country.
No, I would say the country are the people and the nation is the people and the government.
Sorry, say again? The
So I think it's so you have the government and then you have the country, and the country is just like the people, and then you combine them, and then that's what the nation is: the unity of the country and the government.
The country is the people.
Mhm.
The country plus the government is the nation.
Yeah.
Okay. Charlie, John, what do you reckon?
I don't really know the difference between the words, but for me, sort of the state is like irrelevant. Like a nation is made by the people, or country, or whatever the correct term is.
See, I would say the country is the landmass. The nation is the people, and yeah, I mean, yeah, it's kind of separate, right? Like the reason why the country of England is called England is not because like the government that rules it decided it's called England. Like it's called England because it's the land of the English, you know?
Yeah.
And the government which operates in the name of the English people works to protect that land and the English people, as a whole.
Yeah.
I think part of the reason where it gets messy is because we've had so much immigration in the last sort of 100-ish years. Obviously massively sped up in the last like 30, but
massively sped up in the last 2.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes it much more messy.
I just wouldn't even factor them into my like analysis because like they're not supposed to be here.
Yeah, I guess so. But yeah, this is where you run into these issues though of like, oh, Abdul is just as British as you or me, because he well no, Charlie, he got here 5 years ago, right? He's completed his language course, and he's had a steady job at McDonald's for 2.5 years now. So you can't say he's not. He pays tax. You can't say he's not as British as you or I.
I can trace my ancestry back to before the Romans came here.
You fucking bigot. Go to jail. Now.
They're just Vikings.
It's fucking nonsense, isn't it?
Everything they say about Muhammad can just be applied to the Vikings.
Yeah, well...
And
yeah.
Jorvik was not a legitimate state, and I will stand by that.
You'll kill on that hill, as Lee started saying recently.
I will, yes.
I do like that. It's better than die on that hill. I'll kill on this hill. But yeah, I mean, I've sort of come to the conclusion that civic nationalism is bollocks. Go on, Raz.
Can we play the last 10 seconds back again? Because I think they've also conceded more to call.
Yep. Okay.
Own government within a specific geographic territory.
A nation's state derives political legitimacy from the ethnic unity of those it governs, its protective function against colonization, persecution, racial strife or abuse, and its purpose to preserve the culture of its people.
No, the government derives a legitimacy from God, and that is the idea of a monarchy. That is where they derive legitimacy from. And again, this is kind of another conceding to the French definition that Cole was sort of using.
But again, how do you square that with your how do you square that with your sort of atheism / agnosticism?
The government's just a necessary evil. We need a government, and monarchies evidently work. I've seen no other sources that work.
No, but I mean, you just said that its legitimacy comes from God.
Mm-hmm. I think it just works, and I think we just kind of have to buy into it, because obviously, God, I don't believe God's real, but this works, and nothing else we've really tried works. So even if it isn't true, believing in it evidently has worked.
But then, is that not a sort of utilitarian sort of thing of well, it does the job, and therefore I mean, that's kind of unfair. I guess, are you saying that it's legitimate because it works, basically? Like, it works in a sort of like in the scheme of things, like it takes its legitimacy from the fact that it works, and that we shouldn't sort of throw that away. If you find something that works, stick with it. Is that sort of what you mean?
Yeah, I wouldn't. I say I wouldn't, but I wouldn't really like oppose using it either. But I wouldn't say like the government needs to be legitimate. I wouldn't use the term legitimate. More that like this is the government we have. It's working. Well, it works, and therefore we should continue to use it unless we have a better idea, which I don't think we have.
Oh, that's actually a very sort of deeply conservative view.
Was this?
Yeah, absolutely.
Damn, you know, conservative arc now.
Yeah.
I'm conservative maxing.
Ethnicity is a group of people of common origin who share easily definable characteristics, mainly language, culture, and hereditary factors. Ethnicity is an individual's hereditary and cultural origin, and not merely that person's place of birth.
The notion of homeland plays a crucial role in the foundation of a nation-state. A defined homeland is vital for the development of an ethnic group. The absence of a defined homeland makes it difficult to establish a sense of unity and belonging based on shared ancestry.
Nationalism is not about supremacism. It is not predicated on the demand to suppress, oppress, disadvantage, or rule anybody else, but rather upon the right to be free of all those restrictions. Belonging to an in-group is a natural right and need. It is a right which does not infringe upon the rights of any others, and is a right which is morally correct and can be defended on any platform.
Can you just pause it very briefly? So obviously we've been talking about the Welsh and the Scottish who, as we see it today, now have like that nation, if you want to call it that. Going back to what you said earlier about the Kurds, I know nothing about the Kurds, so I'm just simply going to go for something which is a bit close to home, more like the Cornish, who did have their own nation. What would the definition of what Homeland just said, for a population who, I mean, I'm not saying that they're exactly striving for independence, but there is quite almost a nationalistic spirit within Cornwall of the fact that it was its own nation. What would, as Homeland just described it there, what would be their, I don't know, justification for being in that sort of situation?
I think they actually are sort of in favour of, well, they're in favour of more independence for the constituent nations. I mean, I haven't looked into them enough to make like sort of concrete summaries of their belief, but I believe that basically they do want each nation to be more independent. They still want us to be connected, but to have more autonomy.
So it's like various different countries which are still under the United Kingdom, that sort of thing.
Yeah, I think they just want sort of more decentralization than we have now. So
that would also go towards what, I mean, look, I'm not going to use the Northumbrian example because I just used that basically ironically at this point. But for a group of people who have been a nation in the last, I don't know, let's say 500 years, such as the Cornish, or I believe so, even some of the Channel Islands, you think that they would be up for the idea of them having their own, not devolution, but their own autonomy to themselves as well?
I'm not 100% sure. Like I say, I haven't.
Yeah,
I've done a bit of looking into them, not a massive amount.
It is quite a difficult question. I understand that. You need to know what's going through their heads, but it's just something that I'm wondering, really.
Don't they have their own governors?
What do you mean? Sorry.
Well, sort of the overseas territories, don't they have their own like governors?
Well, they're not technically in the UK,
it depends if we're talking about the likes of the Falkland Islands or Gibraltar, or like Guernsey and the Isle of Man.
Well,
And-
let's leave out the islands closer to home, and let's go further abroad, so we can say places like Gibraltar and the Falklands and stuff like that.
I believe they do, yes.
Right.
I don't think the Channel Islands do, but I do think that that Gibraltar, the Falklands, and previously the Chagos Islands also had that. I think.
So for
Yeah.
Eternal, are they English nationalists or are they British nationalists?
Yeah, no, the leader of the party is Scottish. So,
Oh.
British, yeah. Or that's the thing. See, like I said, I think they basically are like unionists, but they just want decentralization more. So it's kind of like they want. I think they want to sort of be a coalition of right-leaning nationalists. As in,
Right.
you guys are Scottish, but like right-wing Scottish nationalists. You guys are Welsh, but like right-wing nationalists, etc., etc. We can be a coalition and sort of help each other out, work together. I think that's the impression I get.
Right. Because I mean, when it comes to like British nationalism, you could just play the Celtic card. Like we're all Celts, so we should all be in one country. Eh? So the Celtic people united under the United Kingdom. Like you could play that logic. So I think when it comes to like nationalism, especially in this country, if not uniquely so, it comes to the question of: are you a sort of English, Welsh, Scottish nationalist, or are you a British nationalist? And I think that will change how you view what your position on nationalism as a concept even is.
I agree, because I think British nationalism inherently sort of leads to a sort of civic nationalism, right? Where Abdul, as long as he loves Britain, he's one of us.
Yeah.
It's like, right, well, yeah, I mean, maybe his granddad came here and so he's like third generation. And maybe he is like pretty well integrated and really does love Britain. But he's not actually like British though. Like
Well, that's with a very broad definition of what loving Britain is. Look, it seems sad, but even people which you would probably call natives, bloodlines which have been here for centuries, what they deem as being British, it's nothing more than cuisine. Like quite frankly, it's like, oh well, what's being British? Oh, I suppose it's having fish and chips on Friday. That's what being British is. Yeah, that's what being British has basically been derived to since we've taken well, I mean, I suppose this kind of goes back to what we said earlier on, where Christianity and Christian values and religions basically just taking a massive step back in society. And I suppose that individualism's taking its place in a way, which as someone who is quite staunch individualistic, it's kind of something I have to concede, really.
I feel like it's an American thing though, where like because we're in the box, we can't see like the boundaries of the box, but the boundaries do exist, and we do, and like if we left the box, we would see the boundaries, but because we're in it, we can't see it, so we can't really like describe what it is. Hence why we just kind of de facto to fish and chips, though.
Yeah, we don't have any culture
True,
because you just don't recognize it as culture because you sort of can't see the waters that you swim in, sort of thing. I find it incredible that leftists, for all their talk of like, respecting other cultures and blah blah blah, have such a shallow view of what culture is. It's like John said, it's food. That's it.
Yeah, it's
That's
cuisine, not customs. And I absolutely hate the fact that I'm quoting Kenny fucking Badenoch, but there we go.
Well, I mean, that's a good quote. it's a good quote. If she says something correct, then yeah, it's true. But it's like, okay, like the entirety of the culture of a people is not like what genre of slop they eat.
Yeah.
There's a lot more to it than that. That's bloody stupid.
After all, we've got the recipes now. Do we still need the people?
Indeed.
Now it's quoting Rowan Atkinson. What is this?
No, I'm a bit. You know, he's a Northumbrian. Him, you know.
Oh yeah, I know.
He's a
No,
Dark
yes.
Briton. You guys heard that term, Dark Briton?
Yeah. I normally just
Sounds
call them
fun.
Southerners, though.
It's like the Britons who are sort of like slightly more tan, than they have like dark hair and like brown eyes. You know,
Oh,
they invented a term for them, Dark Britons, which I quite like. Because being a Dark Briton myself,
Are they more German or are they more like Celtic?
I would assume.
Norman,
Well, I would
even.
assume the Dark Britons would be more like Celtic. Yeah, you'd associate like the Germanic elements with like the blonde hair and blue eyes, wouldn't you?
Yeah. But then would you associate the Celts with ginger hair? And ginger? No, they don't have ginger eyes.
green eyes.
Green eyes, yeah.
Yeah, I guess, yeah. Yeah, I would. Anyway.
My mum's ginger.
Oh, sorry, go on, Charlie. You just say,
Right.
just say your mum's ginger.
I just feel like throwing that out there.
Hopefully.
My dad's ginger.
Ooh, nice one.
To be ourselves within our homeland.
The implications of nationalism, if applied to all peoples, are therefore profound. All ethnic groups have a right to be themselves in their territories and are entitled to due respect.
All ethnic groups have a right to retain their culture, heritage, tradition, and identity without fear of being undermined, persecuted, or threatened.
Each nation has the right to govern and maintain their territories for their people to ensure that their culture, heritage, tradition, and identity remain intact.
See, this is where I think the sort of critique of nationalism being based on sort of Enlightenment, like French Revolution values, this is where that comes from. All this talk of like, each nation has the right to do this. We have the right to do this and this and this and to have this. Like, right, where do those rights come from?
True.
And they would say, well, you know, we just kind of, you know, these are just rights that we have, you know? And it's like, right, but you've just sort of invented those, you know?
Traditional right. It would depend on the country. Obviously, different countries get them from different places. But at least in England, it would come from tradition. That's just how it goes.
That's true. But then again, yes, they're saying all nations have the right to do this and this and this, and you shouldn't interfere with a nation's right to do this and this and this. It's very universal language. So they're not really appealing to tradition here. They're appealing to some sort of overarching, rational sort of framework.
And would they have to concede that the Africans can continue their slave trades? Or would they say, right, well, hang on. No, slavery is going to stop, actually. Even though that would be a violation of what they've just said.
I think they've said that they are like opposed to imperialism, so yeah. And they definitely said about opposition to colonialism, so yeah. Sorry, go on, John.
When we talk, because I'll go back to what you said, Raz. You said that it comes from tradition, right? But in the end of the day, where does tradition come from? Like everything's got its own root, and it seems to be that at least in this country, everything derives from king and God. It just seems to. I mean, I know I'm kind of. I suppose that I'm kind of falling into a hole that you talk about quite a lot, eternal, where you'll say that, you know, because of this liberal paradox, everything has to come from somewhere. I know that's something that you've said before.
I think our rights predate the Christianity, to be honest with you, because our rights would come from the Anglo-Saxon sort of sinnings, and it would have come from their pre-Christianity. Charlie can talk more on this. Actually, he knows more about sort of the pre-Christian Germanic tribes. But they were very freedom focused, and it's only with the sort of feudalism that saw the Germans become the sort of tyrants they are now. But it does actually predate Christianity.
Yeah, well, I would attribute sort of the free spirit of the Germanic tribes to the fact that they were so how to put this? They lived in a very small world. Being just like tribal societies, you know, you probably have a chief and then like a few hundred people. And they would often band together in like confederations and stuff like that, but like they had their own sort of like internal political systems and things like that. But being such small groups gave them a lot of autonomy. So, and obviously lacking the sort of idea of like a sort of a large sort of nation state, sort of, or even something like an empire, like that would have been just across the border from them with the Romans. I would imagine it's just a lack of like a central authority to control them, just gave them a lot of freedom just from that aspect alone.
Okay, that does make sense. Yeah. So it's not like inherently. I mean, I suppose that back then it would be more, I don't know, pagan. I suppose.
Yeah, they would have
Germanic / Celtic paganism, at least in Britain. In Germany, it would just be Germanic.
Yeah. That does make sense because at that point, I suppose the kind of like the God argument kind of goes out the window. I suppose, doesn't it? No, yeah.
What is interesting though is the Anglo-Saxons during the fall of the Western Empire, the Anglo-Saxons migrate to Britain and they take this sort of free spirit with them. But on the continent, the Germans fully embrace like the centralized authority of sort of like what they would have inherited from like the Roman state as it was collapsing. So it's, and they pick up sort of like this. I hesitate to call it totalitarian because I wouldn't really call the Roman Empire a totalitarian state. But they pick up this sort of very centralized sort of monarchical system. Autocratic, yeah.
I mean, obviously, like different. No, you continue.
I was just going to say the Anglo-Saxons didn't pick this up, which I think is very interesting. And I can only imagine it's because by the time the Anglo-Saxons arrived in force in Britain, it had already... Well, it was the first part of the Roman Empire to go, Britain. So I would imagine it's just a case of they had the least amount of Roman influence, I guess.
The demand for self-determination must be granted equally, fairly, and without favour of prejudice towards all nations.
Any move, threat.
All nations. So, again, just like not based on tradition, based on a sort of rational ideal that they've kind of calculated.
Political action to dissolve, displace, or replace an ethnic group in their territory, whether intentional or not, is an act against the rights of the subject ethnic group.
A civilization is born from the nature of the people making up the population in that territory.
So yeah, I'm sorry to keep pausing it, but you see, like the natural rights of each group, they're talking in these like very the sort of nationalism that they're expounding here is not based on sort of British tradition or something like that. It's French. It's based in the Enlightenment.
Yeah,
It's based in Enlightenment 4. It's French. Yeah.
I'm gonna be all they're doing in this video is just conceding to Sargon's point. Like every word that comes out of their mouth is just conceding land.
Well, this is a fair bit older than this dispute, 6 months, but yeah, I mean, it's, you see what I mean? It's based on these sort of Enlightenment premises, right? Of like universal rights, the universal rights of man and of these ethnic groups.
But
So,
who
there
decides?
is.
Well, who decides what these universal rights are? Because it would just end up in imperialism, which they're presumably against.
Yeah, but that's the thing. That's kind of my point. Why Carl isn't actually entirely wrong. What they're explaining here is based on the thought of the left wing of the French Revolution. Yeah, it's interesting. It's interesting that they would fight so vehemently against that characterization, but it's clear that it is kind of based on that. Yeah.
It is clear that if the people responsible for creating a particular culture or identity are no longer present, that the culture and identity will disappear. The indigenous peoples of these islands, the English, Irish, Scottish, and Welsh, have a natural right to self-determination, politically, economically, socially, and culturally. The ideology of internationalism seeks to undermine this right. We all have the right to be free of external control, forced integration, or being subsumed into a homogenized global mass, and to assert our unique cultural identity in our respective territories.
Does this not sound like what Eastern European countries fighting for independence from Austria-Hungary would have said?
Yeah. But I don't understand why they're buying into this though, because we needn't here. Like, this is such an European perspective that I don't understand why they're adopting it.
Mm-hmm. See, I think if you wanted to make the sort of claim that nationalism precedes the French Revolution, you would have to argue from the right-wing perspective of the French Revolution, which speaks to the fact that we're in this sort of like Enlightenment paradigm, right? Where if you want to escape the paradigm that the French Revolution has created, you sort of have to do it from within the French Revolution, like paradigm. It's weird. It just shows the sort of like ubiquity of it, like the totalizing effect that it's had. They need to be making arguments from the right-wing side, right, of the French Revolution, not from the left-wing side. And what they're doing right now is from the left-wing side. And I'm not sort of shitting on them for that. They can do that, but they shouldn't pretend that they aren't, is my point. This argument that they're setting out here, this argument they're setting out here is kind of based on the liberalism of the French Revolution.
Yeah, at first I thought, I was on their side. I was completely on their side. But after watching this, they have just completely conceded the point and then just tried to deny that they've done that. Because they haven't gone with what I said at all, where it's a case of I can't remember what I said now. Never mind, ignore that.
Okay, fair enough. But see, they're arguing from the sort of French revolutionary liberal perspective. They're not arguing from the sort of current day liberal perspective, right? And you can see that because they said they want jus sanguinis rather than jus soli. They want citizenship to be granted based on your blood rather than where you're born. And that's based. But everything else that they're saying is yeah, like I said, and like Carl said, kind of what people on the left side of the king in the National Assembly would have been saying. So yeah, I don't want to belabor the point too much, but yeah.
Nationalism stands against the oppressive, progressive, liberal designs of internationalist elites. Twisted by their desire for money and power, they will make the world as grey as themselves. Their aggressive form of capitalism seeks to make us all into replaceable consumers. They push for uniformity, conformity, an end to uniqueness and to the extraordinary diversity of nations. A world where everyone is equally isolated, exploitable, and ruthless.
This bit's based.
Some political ideologues portray themselves as nationalists when, in reality, they are internationalists squabbling over political power. They care nothing for any ethnic group, our cultures, or the land itself. Do not allow yourself to be deceived. Their deception must be called out at every turn. Nationalism represents a truly radical and, from the internationalist point of view, potentially dangerous idea. However, if people worldwide prioritise preserving their unique identities over the global melting pot concept, it will spell the end of the truly dangerous liberal progressivism that destroys the diversity of nations.
The nationalist worldview is the most natural political theory and the true champion of diversity. It acknowledges.
I don't like the fact that they're saying we're the really diverse ones, but
why do they always cook? Like, what is it in like politicians' brains that just forced them to cook on this position?
Yeah, because diversity is just, I know, part of the waters that we swim in, unfortunately. But I just want to draw your attention to this particular part again.
They prioritise preserving their unique identities over the global melting pot concept. It would spell the end of the truly dangerous liberal progressivism that destroys the diversity of nations.
What if your unique identity was based on a claim over others? You see what I mean? What if your unique what if your unique identity was inherently imperial and you didn't respect these sort of natural rights of these other groups?
Land of hope and God.
Because yeah, to bring to bring Carl Schmitt into this is very good German political theorist. You know, he argued against liberalism on the fact that basically it tries to turn all of politics into debate club, right? But he said, what if you reach a point where you can no longer debate, right? Where the contradiction between two groups becomes so full of friction that the time for talk is over and the time for picking up your guns begins. Liberalism has no answer to that. Liberalism cannot answer that and remain liberal. And I think when you look at it like that, this proves that these guys are liberals. You know, when you pair it with them claiming that every group has these natural rights. Well, if the natural rights of one group, as they perceive it, clashes with the natural rights of another group as that group perceives it, what then? Who do you appeal to? Who could you possibly appeal to in a sort of discussion? You wouldn't be able to. You would just have to pick up your guns and conquer that other group.
Well, this is like the whole question of like imperialism obviously, if there are the colonizers of Africa, for example, we had to do that, otherwise we would have been outcompeted by the Franks and we would have been conquered by them. So for our survival, it required the sort of conquest of foreigners, which they couldn't really justify. So they couldn't really defend themselves from the French in this example. So it's kind of a castrated ideology.
Yeah, it's difficult. It's a thing where if everybody subscribed to this ideal, that would be fine. But the fact is, that's not going to happen. So,
just the first thing that comes to my head is just Islam.
Yes, absolutely, and
I mean, let's not forget how Islam was birthed. Like,
it was spread by the sword.
Yeah, exactly. There's a reason, like Islam spread so rapidly after its creation, right? It wasn't they were just so convincing, right?
Yes, exactly. Yeah. I heard it said before that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, would go to these other countries and ask politely that they convert to Islam, and when they declined, he would he would become less polite.
Yeah.
Yeah, and so yeah, it's, you know, this liberal idea of the free marketplace of ideas that we have, where the good ideas will become popular and will be taken on, and the bad ideas will be sort of outcompeted and they will fall away into obscurity. Again, the problem is, as Carl Schmitt lays out, what if your group, whatever group that is, whether that's ethnic or class-based or whatever, what if your group reaches a point of contention with another group that cannot be solved by discussion? Liberalism just falls apart at that point because it cannot answer that question. So
I think Keir Starmer might have an answer, but I don't think it's a very good one.
Well, yeah, lock them up and ruin their lives, but that's not liberal. That's the issue. For liberalism to preserve itself, it has to betray its own values. So,
yeah, it requires everyone to be English. That's the problem. It requires everyone to be like us.
And everybody is not English. In fact, very few people are English. So
every time, like, throughout this entire conversation, the only thing I can think of is just the imperialistic tendencies of Islam.
Yeah. I mean, just think about this. You guys have probably seen that meme, right? Where it's like, oh, Sati is our culture. You know, the Indians burning the widows. Sati is our culture.
Yeah.
On the one side, and then on the other side, you have the Imperial British army man who says, well, our culture is that when people burn widows, we hang them. You know, you cannot solve this with discussion. There's going to be some sort of fight. One group is going to win and dominate the others. And that's just a fact of life, right? So, anyway.
Identities over the global melt.
Sorry, go on.
So would you say that from an internal perspective, this is fine logic, but once it gets applied to a global perspective, it completely crumbles?
No, I would say that liberalism is inherently flawed. If you had a homogenous nation like we once were, you can have these kind of principles, but at some point, sooner or later, there will be sort of divisions that crop up along whatever sort of lines. Like I said, they could be class-based or, looking at English history, they could be based on an opposition between Catholics and Protestants, for example, whatever. At some point, divisions will crop up and all hell will break loose because discussion is not enough. And so the way I see it is we need to have, I'm trying consciously when I'm thinking about philosophy and stuff and doing my writing and stuff, I'm trying very consciously to make sure that I'm not wording it in a way where it's this is how everybody should look at it. because I don't think the way that I look at things is how everybody should look at it. I'm not trying to write like a philosophy for the world, right? I'm not arrogant enough to think that I could do that. I'm trying to write like a philosophy for the English that could work based on our customs and our way of looking at things. It's like I was saying to you guys before about Spengler, right? Like his idea of the different cultures, and they have such different ways of looking at things that they will just never properly understand each other. And I think there's real truth to that. So we should, so we shouldn't. We should really consciously try to escape from this Enlightenment trap of looking at things in universal terms all the time, pretending there's a sort of universal perspective because there isn't one.
Melting pot concept. It would spell the end of the truly dangerous liberal progressivism that destroys the diversity of nations.
The nationalist worldview is the most natural political theory and the true champion of diversity. It acknowledges the distinct contributions made by various nations to enrich the fabric of humanity, prioritizing the welfare of people over economic and progressive ideas. If all individuals of goodwill understand this worldview and demand self-determination, freedom, and a greater respect for global diversity, it will create a more peaceful and cooperative future for the whole world.
So that's that. I think it's overall not bad. I have some issues with it, some critiques of it, but overall, you know, for a British political party, pretty good.
I've seen worse.
I mean, yeah, way worse. Way worse. But we're not going to, unfortunately, we're not going to have time to look at this other video that I wanted to watch together because it's 50 minutes long and we're already 2 hours in. So we're going to skip this one. But I just want to give a shout out to this video, An Ideology That Swept the World by Ryan Chapman. He sort of explains the roots of nationalism in the French Revolution. Yeah, it's really good. The link is in the bio if anybody wants to watch that. Highly recommend. We're going to take a quick turn to a much shorter video featuring a merchant who actually gives a really good perspective on what nationalism is, surprisingly. So let's enjoy this.
To me, why do you use the word nationalism? People say to me, why do you use the word nationalism? Why can't you say use patriotism? George Orwell, for example, argued for that. And the problem is, since we are talking about semantics, first let's be clear about the idea rather than the terms. The idea is a world of independent nations. That's what we're trying to describe. And the reason that I use nationalism is because that is actually the traditional word for that ideology. And I'm not that interested in altering my vocabulary because of Hitler. I don't want to learn political theory from Hitler. The word patriotism, it's a perfectly fine word, but patriotism means my love of my country. But now we move into political theory. We're looking for a general principle. What term do we use to describe the idea that the world should consist, is better off if it is governed as a world of independent nations? The term patriotism doesn't come close to capturing that. And nationalism simply does.
Martin Heidegger. Now, this
God. Oh, God, Jonathan Bowles is so loud. Bless him. But yeah, but I think that guy there explained it very, very well. The sort of the distinction between patriotism and nationalism. That patriotism is your personal, individual feelings towards your country, whereas nationalism, as he said, and again, think in terms of Enlightenment, global, like universal human values. Right? He said that the world is best if it's governed by independent nations.
It depends on it depends on what the nations are. Like, how autistic do we get? Like, are we going to say, like, are we going to go, like, full on, like, Yugoslavia about this and just say, like, every single ethnic group gets its own nation.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's
Join
sort
the
of,
Balkan slop.
yeah. I mean, that's part of it though, because I guess if you look at things through the lens of nationalism, you would have to say, well, these peoples have the right to self-determination. Therefore, Yugoslavia shouldn't exist. Unless they're happy with, obviously, that arrangement, then fair enough, but...
I think the Serbs are. They seem to be a big fan of ethnic conflict.
Well, I mean, Yugoslavia was actually surprisingly, stable until Tito died.
Yeah, well, I mean, it
just all hinged on one man, unfortunately. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you could say the Soviet Union wasn't stable until Joseph Stalin arrived.
No, but Yugoslavia was actually. I mean, I won't pretend to be an expert on it, but as far as I'm aware, it was actually a pretty good country, governed quite well. People, the people within it were fairly happy with the arrangement, and then basically Tito died and it all fell apart, and suddenly these ethnic frictions sort of came back to the surface, and the economics started to fall apart. But again, yeah, I'm not an expert, so I know people can tell me I'm wrong in the comments.
Yeah, I think it's something to do with after Tito died, the people that came in after him had biases.
Yeah, ethnic biases
for the certain ethnic groups, and it just created loads of friction.
Yeah. Unfortunate. We are now going to move to Morgoth's take on the big debate around nationalism over the last couple of days. And I thought this was a pretty good take. He basically makes the case that the nationalism we're talking about when we just throw around the word nationalism has nothing to do with the French Revolution. And I mean, I do think he's right. So, Raz, would you like to read this since you have the same accent as Morgoth?
Yeah. Right.
Do you want to read it from my screen, or it's probably best if you just get it up yourself, so I don't scroll too far or whatever. But yeah, this nationalism in the 21st century on why modern nationalism is not rooted in the French Revolution. It's by Morgoth's review, and again, if you're watching this, you know who he is, so I'm not even going to plug him. You know who he is.
Moment, it's just loading for me. So when was this written? Or was this a new thing, or was this
This is literally earlier today. Yeah.
Oh damn! Breaking news, lads. Right.
Yeah. Well, this debate only started on Wednesday, so yeah.
God, things happen so fast on Twitter.
Yeah.
I've been watching a back and forth between Carl Benjamin, Sargon of Akkad, and Kenny Smith of the Homeland Party over the nature of nationalism. The dispute emanates from this post by Benjamin. Nationalism is the left wing of the French Revolution. I bear no animosity to either man, and there's more than a bit of bickering over definitions. Neither is the view of that nationalism is simply an outcome of the French Revolution, and therefore unworthy a particularly new way to approach the subject by reactionaries and Christians. However, this discourse raises interesting questions about the nature of politics and identity in the 21st century. There can be no doubt that the term nationalism has extraordinarily bad connections within the minds of masses placed there deliberately and as a matter of policy by the liberal ruling class. Nationalism denotes angry mobs that dictators, wars, and militarism. One need only put the term into Google image search and see what appears to get a sense of the situation. Easily duped rubes waving flags and expressing rage and hatred towards the other are the order of the day. Indeed, the optics and name of nationalism are so appalling that it is the very reason many people are skittish about publicly endorsing it as a worldview.
Yeah, so...
Can we actually put that to the test?
What do you mean?
Like Google nationalism.
Yeah, we can do that. Sure.
This is the bit where it very deliberately says it's about the detriment of other countries, not just promoting your own.
See, it's sort of not that. Well, okay, fair enough. I mean, I was going to say it's not that bad. It's just like flags and stuff. But yeah, the second picture here.
Well, now.
Oh no, sorry. I
you
thought that was like the US with like some tiki torches or whatever. This is Greece, so it's probably innocuous. This one here says xenophobia.
You see, I've got a very different result. I've actually got like a load of World War II Allied propaganda.
Well, I'm using DuckDuckGo.
And I'm using Google.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So
no, wait, we have somebody throwing a Roman here.
I love that guy.
I've actually, funnily enough, got loads of images of like the French Revolution.
Have you?
Yeah.
Makes sense. This is an interesting, interesting definition, because the normal definition, I think Raz said this earlier, would be like, oh, it's like promoting the interests of your nation to the detriment of others. And in fact, I think if you look up nationalism's definition, it actually does say something like that. Devotion, especially excessive or undiscriminating devotion to the interests or culture of a particular nation state. So, especially excessive or undiscriminating devotion.
By virtue of only being applicable to one thing, it would be inherently discriminative. So I don't know what this definition's getting on.
That's true. But this definition here seems to come from the perspective of a group of a people that does not have a homeland. An ideology that promotes the interests of a nation with the aim of gaining and maintaining sovereignty over its homeland. So it's interesting that the pictures here, most of these are very old countries, but it says gaining and maintaining sovereignty over its homeland.
It's a very easy fix. All you have to do is replace the "and" with an "or," and that's fixed.
Yeah, no, good point. Good point. Yeah. Oh. Religion, nationalism, populism. Oh, this is India. Yeah. Oh, wait. Yeah. Yeah, look. Blind obedience. Yeah. But yeah, what I wanted to say to what Raz just read, the part that we just got to, was that again, it's the way he's saying it here, the way that he's saying that people normally frame it is from this sort of right-wing perspective, right? Angry mobs, despotic dictators, wars and militarisms, right? Easily to each roofs, waving flags and expressing rage and hatred of the other. But I think we should be very clear, because people constantly forget this, that nationalism is not inherently right-wing. There's actually nothing inherently right-wing about it, really. You can have left-wing nationalists. In fact, a lot of them are. Look at, like, the IRA, right? Or the Scottish National Party.
Because even, like, if you're just in the Soviet Union and you love the Soviet Union, that doesn't make you right-wing.
No. Exactly.
I always think that these days, the reason why we seem to look at them as left wing,
right wing,
is more just because it's actually the liking of one's country, which before was just common sense. But in today's political climate, that's like that might as well be right, far right. That, how could you possibly like where you're from? You're only born here by chance. You know what I mean? That would be the view, of what I suppose what they would call nationalism, but in the same breath, say that the SNP, that's also nationalism in the same breath.
I would contest that.
Go on.
There's nothing nationalistic about the SNP. They don't love Scotland; they just hate England, and I think that's a very important difference. I would actually, in fact, this might actually contest what Eternal said as well. So the idea that the IRA are nationalists, because it doesn't seem like they love Ireland at all; they just hate England.
But that's the point. It's not about loving the country
It did say they love
necessarily.
Ireland.
It's
You need
about
to remember the Irish ethnic identity is predicated on the idea of hating the English.
well, yeah, it's kind of based on Anglophobia, right? But it's nationalism is about sovereignty of your nation. That's it. It's not inherently left wing or right wing.
I'm actually going to take back what I said about the SNP, because the more I think about it, the SNP don't actually want independence; they just want to join the EU. So I do think I need to kind of like take that back a bit, because yeah, they don't actually want independence. The IRA, at least in their 1910s, 1920s bare bones, I would say that they were nationalist. But
did you not say they were in the 70s, 80s?
In the 70s and 80s, they were so they've been twisted and changed so much. It's difficult to say exactly what they were, because there were certainly people who were still in the same belief of Northern Ireland being a temporary solution. And then, but I think the majority of it was, like you said, it's just the hatred of everything English and everything British. But in their bare bones, I do think that originally, when you look at the likes of Patrick Pearse and Michael Collins and all these people, I don't think that they were trying to create an island in spite of the British. I think they were trying to create an island because they thought that was the best thing to do for Ireland and for the Irish.
Yeah, I would say, I think post World War II, nationalism has had to be denigrated as like an evil right wing thing.
Yeah.
Because obviously, well, for obvious reasons, right? But then it's difficult because you will have these sort of nationalist movements which are left wing, and they have to be seen as the good guys. So it is like a weird paradox there, and I guess it ultimately just comes down to, are you like a progressive good guy? Then all right, you're a good guy. It doesn't matter if you're a nationalist or not. And if you're not a progressive good guy, then your nationalism is bad and evil. So it's just pure like, do we like you or do we not like you?
And history being written by the victors.
Indeed, yes. See, I would argue, sort of give away the thesis of the work that I'm working on. Basically, the French Revolutionary motto, liberty, equality, fraternity, right? I'm just going to sum it up as quickly as possible. Liberty, equality, fraternity. Once you get to World War II and the fascists are defeated, the idea of fraternity is wiped away. So all you're left with is this binary of liberty and equality, which obviously plays out throughout the Cold War until the collapse of the Soviet Union, at which point the idea of equality is kind of put away. And so all we've been left with is liberty, like liberalism, ever since then. And it's not working. Everything is getting ruined, basically. And so liberalism is falling apart. And we're moving into a sort of brave new world now where we might actually be able to get beyond the confines of like French revolutionary ideology. So this is a really sort of scary time to be alive, but also quite exciting. Excited to see what the future holds.
The Enlightenment has destroyed itself.
Absolutely, yeah. As Oswald Spengler basically predicts, right? Like every culture, every civilization, the thing that makes it great is the thing that ultimately ends up destroying it. And so the Enlightenment focus on sort of rationality empiricism, sort of freedom, basically ends up being the thing that makes it collapse eventually. Yeah, very interesting. Should we continue?
Yeah. The birth of the modern nation state in Europe is commonly held to be the Peace of Westphalia, which predates the French Revolution by 141 years. Moreover, it can also be argued that the Peace of Westphalia, which formalized boundaries, created the conditions for the Enlightenment and therefore the French Revolution, rather than being a product of it. Did I say that right? Juvenal.
Yeah, de Juvenal.
Oh, de Juvenal. It's French.
De Juvenal.
Right.
Juvenal.
De Juvenal writes that far from diminishing the state, the French Revolution supercharged it by claiming everything within it as a resource, to which an extent it would have made the kings of old blush. Thus, Napoleon was able to raise army if I could speak. Thus, Napoleon was able to raise army after army and confront nigh on all other great powers alone.
Yeah, I'll just quickly say that's what we were speaking about earlier, right? The birth of the total war. Because the levée en masse, which made it possible for the French Revolution and later Napoleon to command these massive armies, forced the other great powers of Europe to do the same thing, which actually, although it was intended to preserve those countries and political systems that they had, to preserve the monarchies that they had, kind of ended up being their downfall, because they suffered from that same issue of when you start calling up the entire nation to fight for you, the nation is going to start expecting representation in government. And so this led later on in sort of like the 1848 revolutions, for example, where these people wanted liberalism and they wanted democracy. They wanted to get rid of these old, outdated monarchies because, hey, you know, our grandfathers fought and died for this country, and we're still, from their point of view, living in a tyranny. And we want, we want rights and we want representation. So yeah, again, the total war changed everything.
Do you want us to continue?
Raz, are you alive?
Yes, can you not hear me?
Oh, yeah, I can hear you now. Yep. Yeah,
there we go.
Continue.
Right. In place of the great chain of being, what is the great chain of being?
Basically the idea that there is a sort of unwritten contract between the dead, the living, and the yet to be born. So it's not just about what we want today. We sort of have to like give a vote, like metaphorically, to our ancestors and to our future generations.
My dad gave us this, so I'll give my kid this kind of thing.
Yeah, like this, we don't own what we have now. We're just holding it. We're safeguarding it for the next generation. And we have a duty to hand it on in good condition.
It's not just within humans, though. It's also within nature and the animals. The idea that everything is interconnected. Circle life sort of stuff. But
stewardship of the land and stuff. Yeah.
It's a number of things. Yeah.
In place of the great chain of being would be patriotism, rights, and a constitution. Identity would be inextricably intertwined with the nation rather than religion, province, or a local baron or lord. In the French National Assembly, the revolutionaries sat on the left side of the chamber and the monarchists on the right. Our modern understanding of left and right originates here and forms the basis of the argument that nationalism is left-wing.
Yeah, I'll just butt in again quickly to say, like, when you really think about this, right, it's clear how much the French Revolution influences everything that came after it politically. The entire idea of left and right wing comes from the French Revolution, right? The entire idea of being progressive or conservative comes from the French Revolution. Literally, the word conservative did not exist before the French Revolution, for example, right? Like, this changed everything about politics and sort of political philosophy in general from that point onwards. But sorry, continue.
Did ideologies really exist prior to the Enlightenment?
No.
Hmm.
No.
Right. It is worth highlighting here that establishing the modern nation-state with a bureaucracy and colossal quantities of men and equipment at its disposal incentivized neighboring nations to form yet more formalized national states, lest they be crushed. Slowly but surely, the pieces were being placed on the board for the cataclysmic wars of the 20th century, and therefore the modern liberal disdain for nationalism. And therefore the modern liberal disdain for nationalism. What's he sort of getting at with that sentence?
Well, the pieces were being placed on the board for the cataclysmic wars of 20th century, which led to the modern liberal disdain for nationalism. So, like we were saying earlier, because of World War II, you're not supposed to be nationalistic anymore.
Ah, right, okay. Because I was thinking, because after World War One, there was a massive spike in nationalism.
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. But after the Second World War, nationalism became like sort of taboo, right? You can't love your country too much because otherwise you'll end up like with a mustache man, like killing people, you know.
Yet it is commonly forgotten that, for much of that era, the liberal and progressive view was to carve out sovereign states for particular ethnic groups, because such policies were the most rational and trouble-free.
It's true. That's why Carl said that nationalism was left-wing, because at that sort of time, nationalism was liberal and progressive, like relatively. That was the liberal progressive view. So, yeah.
There is then more than an element of truth to the claim that nationalism is historically a left-wing ideology. Yes, yet it also remains the case that today nationalism is regarded as far right, and framing nationalism as left-wing does not reflect the reality of the 21st century. Ironically, the seeds of today's anti-nationalist sentiments can also be found in the legalistic conceptions of post-revolutionary France. Citizenship would be granted or removed by the state. Napoleon Bonaparte was not ethnically French, but Corsican/Italian. To this day, and historically, it has been challenging to find data or records on France concerning ethnicity and racial characteristics, precisely because of the centuries-old tradition of universalism and Enlightenment values. That, and whenever there's like data, I know like Denmark used to do it. Denmark used to report like the ethnicity of rapists, and then they found out they were all from a certain area, and they quickly stopped doing that.
I think Denmark still does, but a lot of people don't. But what he said there is totally true. Like, France does not make any distinction in terms of ethnicity or race in terms of this kind of data and stuff. It's just like, if you're French, you're French.
But the French are a bunch of racists, so I don't really understand that.
The French people are, but the French state is not.
Yeah. The primary objection of the modern nationalist is the arbitrary manner in which the state grants citizenship to the people of the world, while flatly refusing to entertain any concept of ethnic and racial distinction. That is, the universal doctrines of the French Enlightenment and Revolution. Here, man exists only concerning his existence as a state subject, which can be used as a fungible widget for wars, labor, and tax extension. He is permanently replaceable and subservient to an ideal or ideology. The question then is, what is the nature of nationalism as it exists now in the 21st century? I have long believed that what we are now referred to as nationalism is less an abstract ideology in the traditional sense and more firmly rooted in anthropology. A swallow does not need to treatise to know that it must make a nest in the spring. Likewise, healthy people do not need to be convinced that they're more likely to be safe and secure within a stronghold surrounded by people like themselves and not foreigners. Fundamentally, such sentiment is an expression of genetic interest, and we prefer people like ourselves because they carry our genes. The world that globalism and multiracialism have offered Europeans is a world in which we're expected to be oblivious to our own shrinking numbers and to outgroups being handed territory long regarded as ours freely and proudly by the establishment. A phenomenon such as white flight does not occur because a European has consumed data points on race and crime statistics, but because their institution is screaming out to them to leave. Indeed, it requires theory and intellectualism to suppress such innate feelings and work against nature's grain by accepting the abnormal as normal. I was on Twitter earlier and I saw a merchant on the BBC. He called Britain a melting point. Now, immediately hearing that, I said, go back to America, merchant.
Yeah, I despise these Americanisms.
And it doesn't even make sense in Europe. Like, Europe's not a melting point. Europe has a history. Not like America, where they just bring in any old foreigner that'll do like cheap labor for them.
Yeah, I saw in The Spectator, Katie Balls was talking about different constituencies and by-elections and stuff. And she unironically used the term swing states when talking about constituencies which sort of could go either way. Fuck's sake. Yeah.
We literally already have like our own terminology for like different constituencies. We don't need to import American terminology.
Like the English state predates the American one by what? 800 years? And the English are even obviously older than that, so yeah.
Doesn't even make sense. I don't like the American concept of states. And it just makes no sense, but that's off topic.
Yeah.
The term nationalism, with its baggage and endlessly negative connotations, has a lens inadequate for describing what currently afflicts us. It implies merely another ideology from a buffet of ideologies that can be bickered about and castrated, tested for coherency and various potential policies, etc. However, this is to misconstrue the nature and scale of the calamity that is befalling us, which is nothing short of existential. Yeah, I wouldn't say nationalism is an ideology of itself. I'd say it's more of a belief that can be included in other ideologies. The word nation. Well, hang on, no, because surely globalists want like a global country, like a global nation. So would a globalist not be sort of a terror nationalist, I guess? Oh, he's dead. Put him against the wall.
I guess a globalist would just be like a... Well, they'd actually be an imperialist, wouldn't they?
Mm-hmm.
They want to create the global empire of man.
They have to use imperialism to be able to get to their end goal, so yeah.
Well, would that make them a nationalist then, since they want to have the earth in a nation state? And they presumably would support this nation state.
No, it would make them imperial.
Sure, but
no, it would make them an imperialist.
And I think you can be both an imperialist and a nationalist.
I suppose that if we're going through the traditional definition, you're right, thinking about it, because I suppose that quite literally the great imperial powers like the British Empire and the Spanish Empire, I suppose they were both. So yeah.
Yeah, depends on your definition of nationalist, doesn't it? I mean, that's what this entire argument is about. How do you define it? You know,
the word nation. Oh, I think we've got to this point now. The word nation etymologically derives from Latin "nasci," meaning to be born, nature, natal, and nation, also natal. and nation all stem from a common root and denote life and birth in an anthropological sense. This too predates the French Revolution by millennia. More importantly, we see once again that even without its root etymology, group selection and distinctiveness form its core. Look at the language surrounding nationalism today, and it is almost always associated with death and genocide. So don't sell it to us, both past and present. Again, this is not so much an ideology of old, such as Marxism or libertarianism, but the expression of a rat in a sack thrown into a lake, a set of doomsday dates on when the demographic tipping point in births or population replacement tips over into a game over scenario. A ticking clock that never stops and can't be slowed down. The news is a daily churn of outrage and horror. Myopically deranged politicians and outraged hatred spat in the faces of the natives. Long gone now is the flowery language and philosophical ruminations of a post-monarchical order. There are no grand armies to send into battle and no romantic era paintings of heavily bossomed, sword-wielding matriarchs. I've never seen my Twitter front page. In the 2020s, the movement known as nationalism has no higher aims or goals than preventing people from fading into the historical twilight. It is the worldview of the shipwrecked and the destitute. What is called nationalism today is merely a tattered vessel that seems to be more seaworthy. Perhaps nativist would be a better word, or the more euphemistic and censor-proof traditionalist. However, such an optical lash of paint will not change the underlying dynamic or existential nature of this crisis. To distinguish between the past and the present, we can say classical nationalism, a political formula imposed top-down by elites to formalize and consolidate power over the masses. 21st century nationalism, the emergent phenomenon of European angst and dread an unwanted demographic shift within the globalist paradigm. For this reason, modern nationalism has a poorly fleshed out ideological framework with different approaches and proposals emerging from the initial premise. It is not another worldview to pick off the buffet of ideologies, but people reacting to the material conditions with which they find themselves and their families. Despite this article's bleak and somber tone, there is, of course, space for idealism and vision of a better tomorrow. What will be our vision of the romanticism of the past? Which sought to re-enchant the land? I think it would be minimalistic, a clearing away of the din and screech of the globalist age. But that is discussion for another time. Subscribe to Morgoth's review.
Thank you, Raz. Beautiful. So, what do we reckon of his distinction here? I mean, it's very bleak, but
it's not a phase, Mom. It's not a phase.
Nah, Morgoth is. I mean, he's brilliant, but he's so pessimistic. But then I am too most of the time, so I don't know. It kind of works, but yeah, his distinction between the two types of nationalisms here. A political formula imposed top-down by elites to formalize and consolidate power over the masses. Damn. He says that's the old version. And then this current one is basically Europeans being, well, having anxiety and dread at the massive immigration that we're going through right now.
They feel less like definitions and more like descriptions.
Yeah, I guess you're right. Yeah, That's true. But I think like the point of this essay basically is to counter the idea that nationalism is well. I mean, he kind of says like, yes, nationalism is a French revolutionary kind of ideology. It actually is sort of a left-wing thing, but what you're talking about is not what we're talking about when we talk about nationalism. And I think he's right about that, right? When, like I said, when we throw around the word nationalism, I'm a nationalist, this guy's a nationalist, blah, blah, blah. We love the nation, we want it to do well, etc. We aren't talking about the same thing that the left-wing French revolutionaries were talking about, you know?
Yeah, when I talk about nationalism, I'm not talking about anything related to like the left-right paradigm, really.
Or 18th century European politics.
Yeah,
We're
it's
talking
just,
about
not relevant.
Our governments, regardless of whether they call themselves left wing or right wing, are flooding our countries with foreigners, and it's ruining them. Kind of simple as, right? And our governments should be working in our interest and in the country's interest, rather than in anybody or anything else's.
It feels like Carl's tried to make like a give like a bit of a hot take to like how do I put this?
He wants those Twitter bucks.
No. Like I think he's thinking like he wants to make like a hot take to like, because he likes talking about like philosophy and like stuff like that. So I feel like he's gonna try and do that thing where he says like, as he does with a lot of things, talking about how we need to move away from like the Enlightenment and we need to have like a more traditional way of thinking. So he's set the stage for sort of like a conversation on why we need to stop talking about nationalism. But in doing so, he's missed the point of what people are actually trying to talk about.
So you think it was intended to be a 4D chess move?
Well, I think he's just being like very philosophical, as he always is. But I feel like he's kind of missed the point of that, like what people are talking about.
Yeah, I think, and I mean, coming from me, right? I think he's like over philosophizing it.
Yeah.
He does do that a canny bit, like.
A canny bit. No, yeah, it's yeah. I mean, like I've said, it's kind of obvious. Sorry.
What's your point there?
I was just repeating what you said. But no, like I said, I think it's quite clear when we're talking about nationalism. It's something much more simple, actually, than everything that we've just been discussing here, right? We want the governments to do things that make the country better and make our lives better. If that helps other people, then great, you know what I mean? But helping other people should not be the first priority. Helping our own people should be the first priority. Simple as. And it's not philosophical, really. It's very realistic, right? We are the ones who give you the tax money. You are the ones who are supposed to represent us. So behave yourselves, do things which will actually help us. Stop with all this other bullshit, this other ideological bullshit. And just be good politicians. You know what I mean? It's actually like a very simple thing. It's not very philosophical at all. It's real. Like, this kind of nationalism is not like in abstractions and like esoteric debates about the nature of enlightenment or whatever, you know.
Yeah, I feel like a problem Carl has a lot is that he's too. I don't know how to say this best. I'm just gonna say he's too smart, and he can't really like talk to people properly that aren't as smart as him. Which means that when he does, he kind of talks past them, and like he can't really agree.
I think the problem is if you're going to come out with like a hot take, you have to be ready to like explain it. And he just didn't really seem ready to explain it, because the explanation that he did give was subpar. And obviously it's Twitter, right? And you know, like there are limitations just sort of based on that, you know what I mean? But you should be ready to explain what you mean. And so, boys, what have we learned anything about nationalism today?
I think nationalism is the Norman yoke and should be eradicated from England along with all the other French parts of the country.
Yep. John, Charlie,
Yeah.
any thoughts?
Yeah, it's kind of broadened my view. Weirdly enough, the thing I've actually learned the most from this was what you were saying about the world, like Europe before the French Revolution. I suppose it didn't really, come to me just how much everything had changed. The little, how little you really thought necessarily about your nation, if you want to say that. But it wasn't even a nation at the time. And that's kind of what I've learned primarily from this, as well as bits of what nationalism is.
There's an interesting phrase that I heard once, which is something like the past is a foreign country.
Yes.
And so it's kind of, you take the idea of, England versus whatever other foreign country, and obviously they're very different. But you take that sort of geography and think of it in terms of time instead, and the differences are actually just as big.
Yeah.
Obviously, there's a continuation, right? There's like a common thread because of your country developed out of the country that it used to be, but it's so different that it's essentially a foreign country. It blows my mind. How much some things change, but also how much a lot of stuff still stays the same at the same time, But go on, Charlie.
No, I said that same quote to Raz on our last stream when I was talking about the Persian Empire. And so like just describing many of the things that like are there and the sort of things they did that just don't exist anymore. Like, for instance, there was these bees that they kept, and if you ate the honey, it would make you like high. Now, but these bees just like don't exist anymore. Like, there's no honey we know of that makes you high.
Damn.
So it's just like, and also like Iraq today is just like a giant desert. But back in those days, it would have been like quite green, especially around like the rivers.
I'm going to betray my lack of knowledge of like ancient history. Iraq is like Babylon, right?
Yeah, pretty much.
So because there was the what was it? The Gardens of Babylon or something. That was one of the wonders of the world, wasn't it? Or am I thinking
the
of something
Hanging
else?
Gardens of Babylon.
Yeah.
Yeah, we actually think they might have actually not existed though. That's the thing. They might have been made up.
That's very sad.
we can't find any archaeological evidence of its existence. So.
See, I mean, obviously archaeology, well, that looks beautiful. Oh, wait, I'm not showing my screen. What a fool. I was just looking at a bunch of pictures like, oh, that one's nice. Oh, this
happens to the best of her.
Very nice. The thing is, the issue I have with archaeology is, right, I think a lot of people take it as, oh, there's no archaeological evidence for this. Therefore, didn't happen. Wasn't real. Didn't exist, But the absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, right? And I feel like a lot of people do think in that sort of way when it comes to archaeology.
The counterpoint I'll make here is that the Hanging Gardens of Babylon are so big, you would think like.
Well, yeah, and if they're made of stone and stuff, yeah, I suppose.
Yeah, like the pyramids and stuff like that are still there. Like, why would the Hanging Gardens of Babylon not be there still? Unless they were like intentionally dismantled.
I mean, maybe they were. That is beautiful.
I mean, it's certainly possible.
I think it depends as well on what you're like trying to prove. Because I mean, like, if we're gonna say like, oh well, there are two suns circling around the world, and you say, well, hang on, there's no evidence of that, and then you say, right, well, a lack of evidence doesn't mean it's not true. I think obviously, well, now hang on, that obviously means it's not true. But if it's like, well, some guy said something happened in India. I didn't see it, but he said so. Well, not seeing it doesn't mean it's not true, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Oh, Charlie did not like that.
Charlie's, yeah.
Oh,
John,
sorry, not Charlie,
John.
sorry, John. John did not like that statement. No, I'm joking. Yeah, I mean, like I say, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Obviously, I mean, you can sort of infer that, like, all right, well, there's no evidence for this. Maybe it didn't happen then, you know, but it's not evidence that it didn't happen, is my point.
Honestly, I am of the opinion that if there's no evidence something happened, then it just didn't happen. I always tend to assume it's not true until it's proven true, or at least there's evidence to suggest it's true.
Yeah, I think that's fair. I think that's fair. I guess I will ask then, who do we think, I don't want to say one, but who do we think was more correct out of Carl and Kenny Smith of the Homeland Party? Or we'll just say Homeland in general.
I mean, I guess I'll say Homeland, but the definition from that video seems a bit French to me.
I'm going to say the same thing, to be honest, yeah.
Carl won Homeland, right?
On the surface, before diving into it, in specifically, specifically that video which Homeland made, I was fully backing the Homeland, but like Charlie says, after seeing their definition, it just seems to contradict everything that they said, quite frankly.
Yeah, I would say that's my opinion too. I still think that, like, from what I've seen, they are the best party we've got at the moment.
See, you've blackpilled us a bit, to be honest. I thought they were like really good, and then you showed us that video, and I was sat here thinking, well, okay, Tories,
Well, no, I mean, in fairness, they're the only party calling for deportations, and not just of illegals.
That's
legal
such a
immigrants
low
as well.
bar,
No,
like,
no,
you
but,
have to. That's such a low bar.
No, but it actually really isn't. They are talking about getting rid of people who we let come here. That's actually, like, fairly extreme. I mean, it's what we need,
that is the issue, though, isn't it? Like,
that's what we need, yeah. And reform. I mean, you must have seen the things that Farage has been saying recently, right? If we don't surrender to Islam, then we lose. Deportations are a political, what was it he said? Political impossibility, so I'm not even going to waste time thinking about them. He's a Tory. I like Farage on, like, a personal level, but politically, he's weak, man.
When I went to see him on Wednesday, one thing he did actually say, though, was that we should close the borders.
Oh, it's a bit fucking late for that, isn't it?
Which, well, the point he was trying to make is that, like, we should bring less people in. Not so much as I'm going to deport them, but it's something, I guess.
No,
but it's still population growth.
It's nowhere near enough as well. Nowhere near. I'm going to look for a tweet that I did yesterday because I was feeling blackpilled yesterday, boys. I was feeling so blackpilled yesterday, as I always do when I make the mistake of looking at immigration statistics and demographics. I don't know why I do it to myself. Okay, I found it. The net migration figure for the year to June 2022 was 745,000. The net immigration figures for the year to June 2023 was 906,000, more than the population of Liverpool, nearly 3,000 people a day.
Oh, God.
The net immigration figure for the year to June 2024 is provisionally 728,000, but will inevitably be revised upwards to at least 800,000. 1 in 6 people in England and Wales were born outside of the UK. Since 2001, we have imported more than 8 million people. In 2022, a third of all births in the UK were to mothers born outside of the UK. These are bleak fucking numbers. Really, really bleak fucking numbers. Because these are the net migration figures as well, right? So you factor in the fact that, 400,000-ish people leave each year. So let's take the 906,000 number there, right, for 2023. I believe it was actually about 400,000 people left 2023. Assuming that like half of those people were British people, it's probably slightly more than that, but assuming it's half, basically we've let in 1.1 million foreigners, sort of when you fiddle around with the maths, right?
That's US immigration figures.
It's a ridiculous amount. It's something like we increase our population by 1% each year just from immigration. Is that right? 9? Yeah.
The problem is though, when they're not left to pillage, they'll just fuck off.
Yeah, but I don't know if that's true, man. Like, I don't think the 8, 9, 10 million foreigners here will leave when the country becomes poor. The country's already poor.
Yeah, but they're not poor yet, because they're being protected by the government. But eventually, that money is going to dry up, and when it does,
That's
they're
true.
just going to go to another country where they can leech off.
That's true, and I think a fair few will leave, but it's not going to be homogenous like England again. That's never going to happen again.
No,
Unless we start kicking people out.
No, yeah, unless we get a little based about it. But I think, they're here for the money. They're here for the money. So once the money dries up, they will. I think it's reasonable to assume they will just follow the money.
I don't think enough of them will follow the money. Is the problem.
A good number of them will, and I
But
bet
see,
that
like-
will
Like I
be
saw,
reflected in Labour
Yeah.
Party votes.
I saw something. It was like I don't remember who it was, or I tried to look it out. But basically, he did like a big deep dive on these numbers and estimated that the white British population has gone down to around about 65%. I don't think 35% of the population are going to leave when we get a bit poorer than we are now. It's not going to happen.
Well, I'm not thinking a bit poorer. I'm expecting an economic crash. Something like Great Depression levels.
I think
Because,
my point is
ultimately,
I think my point is you can't be
there's
too
nothing left.
optimistic. You can't be too optimistic about, oh well, the people will just leave like when it gets bad enough. I don't think they will. We have to kick them out.
Why wouldn't they?
It's not just going to
They
happen.
left their own country.
Well, a lot of them actually didn't though. Like a lot of them were born here, right? But
Oh, the ones born here aren't gonna, but they don't have anywhere to go, do they?
well, they have their own country to go to.
Well, yes, but the way they would view it is that this is their country.
Yeah, but the way we should view it is that it's not. So go back to Nigeria. Like that's where you belong.
Yeah.
It's just it's troubling. It's troubling, man. Like just how quickly this has happened as well. It was 1971 census, I believe it was. If the country was literally like 95% British. So it's literally in like 50 years. We've gone down this seemingly irreversible path. And the problem is that effectively reversing it, is so difficult.
I mean, yeah, but the Reconquista happened, so it is like doable.
Yes, the Reconquista happened. I just the people today are not made of the same stuff as the Reconquistadors were made of. Is what you have to understand, right?
Yeah, well, Mohammed hasn't met me yet.
I mean, the thing is, and I'm not like I'm not like attacking you guys, but the right wingers of today are like watching tranny porn in their rooms. Scared to like make a phone call because it gives them anxiety. You know what I mean? Like, we are not made of the same stuff as the people that reconquered Spain from the Mohammedans were made of.
The Mohammedans. I'm going to start calling them that for now.
You should. It's the proper term. It's the proper term. We shouldn't use their own word for them. We use our word for them. Saracens. No, the Saracens were a specific group, though, weren't they? Or like they were.
I've only really used the term Saracens in the context of the Crusades, to be honest.
Yeah. But yeah. Anyway, I mean, my overarching point, right, is we're not made of the same stuff. The situation is like a million times worse because there's fucking loads of them. Half of the country is on their side, right? Half of the indigenous fucking British people are on their side.
I don't think that's true. I think the country are very steadily against it, and I think the longer this happens, the more people turn against it.
Yeah,
but people are scared to talk about it. So what difference does it make?
And the issue is, it's not like we just need to wake up enough people and suddenly it'll change. You need a sort of organized group that can seize power and make this shit happen. Because these like disorganized like protests and petitions and stuff, it doesn't do anything. It doesn't do anything at all.
I was talking to Charlie about this, and I think the government are completely unprotected right now. I think there's nothing keeping the government standing anymore. Because what keeps the government up? Well, it's the police and it's the military. And when I look at the riots that happened, I see the military told Keir to go fuck himself. So he's lost that one. The military aren't helping him. And the police were completely outnumbered. They were outnumbered, they were outmatched, and that was before the Muslims started getting sick of them. So I'm looking at a government that is despised by its people, that has no support from the military. The police are incapable of dealing with even small revolts. And the government is just looking like it will collapse with the slightest bit of pressure. There is nothing keeping it up right now. And especially
the only thing keeping it up is Keir Starmer's stubbornness.
Well, and and the fact that they have a massive majority, so the fact is they have a massive majority, so unless the actual government like itself starts infighting massively, there's no need for them to like call an election until late 2028. So unless they really start like fighting each other, they could just stick it out. It doesn't matter.
I'm not really talking like election kind of thing. I'm talking about the fact that like there's no force behind the government now. And I think it is a case of just once people clock onto the fact that the government can't actually do anything now, then they're fucked. The only thing that's keeping them going is the idea that people still think the government can like stop it. But I don't think that's true. And now that Trump's in power, you know, I mean, you got Trump and Elon Musk banging on Keir's door every day, saying, "Right, well, hang on, what's this about?" He's completely isolated himself, and I don't think. I do think the slightest bit of pressure will just completely collapse the entire system.
No, yeah.
Have
So
you ever
I
seen-
think
You're old. You like so. Have you ever seen? Sorry, that came off rude. But no, you're older. So like, have you seen the movie where it's the guy in the train and it's like snow everywhere, and
No.
it's like the only train. Well, the whole point of the movie is that it's like a dictatorship on a train because it's heat, obviously. And
Mhm.
at the end of the movie, they find out that the guards actually don't have any bullets, so then they just rise up and kill all the tyrants. And I think it's a very similar situation where the gods don't have any bullets, but they're hoping people don't notice.
But I think the problem is that you're sort of falling for the populist delusion, right? The idea that like the disorganized mass can achieve like anything. You need an organized group to make things happen. And
I think you need an
there are
organized
no
group.
avenues to effective organization on the right. That's clamped down on immediately.
I don't think it has to be organized because, I mean, I would agree it has to be organized if your opposition is organized, but they're not. Like, realistically, it's just bureaucrats.
Well, yeah, the administrative state exists to organize. So,
Yeah, but they kind of failed in that because, I mean, we saw how like useless the police were during the riots. Like, they were useless. They couldn't do anything.
well, I mean, what changed? Like, they kept it under control.
They didn't know that was the thing. They didn't actually keep it under control. They
But
just waited until people went home and then got them. But the riots themselves were completely uncontrolled.
No. But I mean, like, the situation as a whole, like, nothing happened.
No, I think. Well, look, because if it didn't like happen, I don't think I or anyone else would have realized just how like powerless the government are. Because before this, we assumed the military would help the government, the police would be able to deal with it, but they just couldn't. So I think it has shown the government to be in a very weak position.
I don't know, man. I mean, like, they got through it. I mean, yeah, like, everyone hates Keir Starmer, right? That's true, but ultimately, they got through the riots basically fine. Like, nothing happened. You know what I mean? Like, no one even died, like, in the riots or whatever. You know? Like, nothing happened.
Yeah,
Well, and actually, they started just whacking people in prison willy-nilly and like gloating about it on social media, and the riots stopped like overnight.
Yeah, but I mean, even then, like the heavy-handedness kind of just like reinforces the point that they can't do anything. Because I mean, the only reason you'd act like so heavy-handed is if you were getting a bit desperate. So
I don't know if it was so much. I mean, you might be right. They were definitely like stretched, right? The resources were stretched. That's true. But I don't think it was like desperation more so than just like, look, if we do this, it will end more quickly because they're all disorganized. And once they see that they could get arrested for doing this, they're going to stay home. And this is exactly what happened.
No, because it was the length of the arrests of the prison sentences as well. Like it wasn't just a case of right, we've arrested you, you can go back home the next week. It was a case of right, we've arrested you 10 gorillion years in prison. That shows weakness, because you wouldn't give them 10 gorillion years if you weren't terrified of it happening again. I mean, one of the reasons why the medieval era had such harsh laws is because they couldn't catch any criminals. So the one guy they did catch, well, they had to mutilate him to send a message. And it's the same kind of logic. They can't, if this happens again, they're fucked. So they have to try their desperately to prevent it from happening again. And fear is the only way they can do that.
But these people are like in prison right now. One of these people actually has killed themselves. Peter Lynch, right? Killed himself. And I mean, the entire situation is just over. We've moved on from it.
I don't think we have. I think we can. I mean, the Tommy Robinson protest, that was a direct consequence of it. Even now, the speculation about Keir actively keeping the killer in the country, that's still going on. I think there was a massive hit to Keir's popularity, if not one of the biggest. I think we can still definitely feel the effects of it.
Yeah, I mean,
especially with the lying as well. The lying really fucked them over a bit.
I don't know, man, because it's just like I said, like nothing has changed. Nothing has actually changed.
I mean, you say nothing has actually changed, but like, I mean, you could say that about anything, though, couldn't you? Like, nothing drastic changes overnight. It's a case of small things add up until eventually you look back at like a year ago and it's completely different.
I mean, yeah, that's true. Like they have only been in government for like 5 months. Yeah, that's true. But
and look at the 5 months; it's been a complete hell.
Yeah, and no one's fucking done anything about it. Nobody is doing anything about it at all. Because
a ship with this many holes is destined to sink.
We're unable to organize. An organization is needed to put down the beast. I don't know, man. I don't know. It's blackpilling, but and the problem is as well, right? Come 2028, new election, who's going to win, right?
Reform.
Labour.
Well, presumably Labour, maybe even Tories. Reform, probably not. But even if they did win, they wouldn't do anything.
It'd stop imports and it pushes the paradigm to the right.
So it would
halt
the problem is stopping imports. We needed that 8 years ago.
I mean, yeah, but like if we stop imports now, like that stops the problem from growing. And then actual opposition to reform can grow in. Maybe Homeland, maybe a new one pops up.
Problem is, if we import 1 million people for the next 4 years, and then Nigel comes in and says, right, no more new people. Like, we are no closer to solving the problem. It's just going to stop getting... We're going to slow down, like, the speed at which it gets worse. Like, foreigners outbreed us, right? Muslims, half of Muslims are under 25. The average age for a white British person is like 42. Because we just aren't having enough kids. It's something like 10% of white British, I think it's 11% of white British people are 75 or older. And so in the next like 10 years, most of those will be dead. Like the demographic situation is fucked.
They're the ones that support immigration.
But the problem is we aren't replacing them with any more new people. So the percentage of the white British is going to go off a cliff in the next sort of decade. Like I said, half of Muslims are under 25.
I'd imagine they'd mostly be in the cities, though. Like, you don't really get them outside of them.
Well, yeah, they're in the cities for now, but they're not going to stay there forever. And, I mean, the cities are where things happen, man. Like, the cities are where change is made.
What about you, Charlie? You're normally the the opposite of opposite of pessimist. That's what you are.
Optimistic.
What do you think?
Optimist.
Optimist. That's it. What do you?
I'm not sure. With how things are at the moment, like, I'm finding it very difficult to make a sort of estimate of what might happen in the future. And at least sort of the further future. The way I see it though is right now Keir Starmer isn't going to stick around. He can't, and sooner or later, whether it's his party, whether it's public pressure or something like that, he's going to go. Ideally, that would result in a general election, but I doubt it will. As for the question of immigration, I feel like it can only get better. Like, unless, like, I don't know, Keir Starmer starts sending the Royal Navy to go just, like, kidnap Middle Easterners and bring them to Britain. Like, I don't really know how this gets worse than it already is.
I think it gets worse than it already is because they will decrease the net immigration number from 900,000 to 500,000. Right? Yes, that's a decrease. It's still an increase in the number of people coming in, though.
Sure, but it slows down the growth of the issue.
But
I think
it's still
time
growing.
is the best thing we can get right now. Like,
we don't have time.
Time is valuable.
We don't have time.
It gives us more time.
But we don't have time.
Well, what do you mean?
Like, the situation as it is right now, we are fucked unless we act. Like, literally, unless they start fucking deporting people in the next, like, year, we're screwed. We have to start kicking people out.
I don't think there's, like, an unsalvageable point, realistically. Like, I mean, maybe, like, but I don't think that's... I think that's probably something we'll have to worry about, like, 10 years' time, maybe? I don't know. It's hard to predict, but it certainly isn't now, I don't think.
I hope you're right. Oh, I despair. Anyway, we're going to end it there, but I don't want to leave it on on such a sour note. So,
I think maybe this will lighten it up a little, but I think the worse the problem gets, the more extreme the solution is, and the more extreme the solution is, the more likely it's going to work.
The more effective.
Yeah, because at the end of the day, it's entirely possible that it gets to a point where we just stop putting them in camps.
I don't want to do it. I just want them to fuck off.
I'm not exactly saying that's a great solution, is it?
It fixes the problem, and I think that is a very real possibility. Now, whether we like it or not, I think that'll be up to the individual, but it is a very real possibility, and I think it will definitely solve the issue.
I just want to send them home.
I don't think English people would support a solution like that.
There's no reason to have a solution like that. It shouldn't come to a point where there's a solution like that.
Just ship them off.
Concentration camps in the UK is not.
That's all this is.
If it gets to a point where, like, the British people become a minority, the solution then isn't camps. The solution then is war, right?
That would be the solution if that was to happen. Because who's going to be the people who are inside? You know, if you've got a system which is supported by the majority of people, who's going to be in the camps?
Well, I think the hatred will rise, and I think as hatred rises, like these extreme solutions become more acceptable.
I don't
If we're a
know.
minority,
Honestly,
we're the ones in the camps.
maybe, but I think the British people, like the average sort of British people, are so cucked. That they'll just sort of accept it. Like, as long as they have football, as long as they have beer, you know, it's not my problem.
Nah, I think you can only poke a line so much before eventually it's going to hit you.
Oh, let's hope so.
I mean, is that not what the incel terrorism is?
Hey.
To my understanding, that's becoming more common. I might be wrong.
Incel terrorism.
Yeah.
I don't know.
The idea that these people are just getting like screwed over by society, so they just start like shooting things.
All right. Well, that's not good.
Well, I think most of them are like trans now.
Wouldn't surprise me. Oh, anyway, boys, we'll leave it there. I'm very tired, but I don't want to leave it on such a sour note. So I've decided that a new sort of feature of the Right Angle podcast will be ending each episode with a short poem by a great Englishman. So, firstly, I will get you guys to give your plugs and stuff. So, Raz, where can people find you?
They can find me on YouTube at project_Razmataz. That's project with a K. Because I'm a big fan of the KKK. You know, I'm a big supporter of them. Democrat Party, I love them. Every other week, fortnightly. Fortnite, I like Fortnite. Yeah, fortnightly we do streams. So check it out.
Wonderful. And John?
Yeah, just you can find me on Instagram, JG_politics. I might not post that often, but I've usually got whatever's on my mind. Usually got that on my story. So yeah, come and have a follow and see what's annoying me on that particular day.
Yeah. And Charlie?
Yeah, go follow me at Megamin on Instagram or Twitter.
You're cleaning up your Twitter, right? So
I'm mildly draining the cesspool. That is my Twitter. You know, it's a case of like it's a shithole, but it's my shithole, so I like it.
Yeah,
my Twitter, it would infinitely be more interesting, however, though. So
fair enough. Okay. Yeah, thank you very much, boys, and thank you to the crowd for watching. And we're going to end with a little Wordsworth. I wandered lonely as a cloud that floats on high o'er vales and hills, when all at once I saw a crowd, a host of dancing daffodils. Along the lake, beneath the trees, 10,000 dancing in the breeze. The waves beside them danced, but they outdid the sparkling waves in glee. A poet could not but be gay in such a laughing company. I gazed and gazed, but little thought what wealth the show to me had brought. For oft when on my couch I lie, in vacant or in pensive mood, they flash upon that inward eye, which is the bliss of solitude. And then my heart with pleasure fills, and dances with the daffodils.